I think it is super important as a man. We have to take it upon ourselves to really make our whatever we want, whether it be the gym, podcasting, jujitsu, whatever it may be. We have to set it at a time where it's not going to pull from anything else. If I tell my wife, hey, every Saturday around 1 o'clock, I'm going to be in the gym for 3 hours, don't bother me, whatever, that's going to be a huge different reaction than if I say, hey, every day at 4 a.m., I'm going to wake up, I'm going to get my workout in. And then that way, by the time you guys wake up around 6 or 7, I'm already a couple hours in and I'm ready to go. Like, those are two very different scenarios.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Dr. Joey Munoz Show, your go-to podcast for all things nutrition, health, and fitness. I'm your host, Dr. Joey, Nutrition Sciences Ph.D., and founder of Fit for Life Academy. As you can tell, I'm getting very good at going through that introduction. That was actually the first time I went through it and recorded it perfectly. On all previous episodes, if you guys listen regularly, I have to say that probably like 3 or 4 times before getting it correctly. So I'm pretty proud of myself on this one. All jokes aside, just recorded a wonderful podcast with a good friend of mine, Andrew Zaragoza. Andrew is a co-host of The Power Project. You may know The Power Project if you follow Mark Bell and his crew out in California. I've been listening to their podcast for quite some time. Andrew's somebody who I resonated with a ton just from listening to his podcast, and I'm happy enough that I had the opportunity, or I'm fortunate enough that I had the opportunity to have him on the podcast here today. So the main thing that I wanted to talk to Andrew about was how he's been able to really prioritize his health and fitness while being an entrepreneur, running a business, and being a dad as well. So he has a young baby, similar to myself. His son's a little bit older than mine. But I wanted to have this conversation because he's mentioned things on his podcast that I think would be really helpful to my audience, especially those that are newer parents and maybe thinking about the fact that it's difficult to navigate health and fitness when you become a new parent. And the truth is that it certainly is, right? It's difficult. Things are different. Things change. You're busier. You're more stressed. But that said, there are definitely ways to still make sure you can live a healthy and active lifestyle and achieve your goals. With that said, we'll go ahead and jump into the conversation. As always, I hope you guys enjoy, and I'll catch you at the end of the episode. Andrew, how are you, my man?
My man, Joey, dude, thank you so much for this opportunity. We were just talking before we hit record. I've been a fan of yours and following you for I don't know how long. And, again, it wasn't even a nutrition thing. It was just you being a bro inside the gym. And I was like, you know what this guy's talking about is actually legit. Let me click follow. And sure enough, dude, since then, it's been so cool seeing the progress and your growth. And, we brought you up on the Power Project before. And so, like, everything you're doing is clicking, it's working. And, again, just as somebody that's just watching from afar, like, I'm so stoked for like the success that you're having. And it's scary that you're just getting started. So, all that to say, thank you so much for this opportunity to hang out with you today, man. Thank you.
No, of course, man, and thank you for taking time to be here. As I mentioned, you, Mark, and Seema, you guys are people that I've been following for quite some time, and it's really cool to be able to connect with you. I really want to center this conversation around having success with health and fitness as a parent, because it's tough. And that was one of the main things that really made me resonate and connect with you, that you share your story on your podcast and you talk about some of the struggles that you've had and how you and your wife have worked together to be able to make time for health and fitness, because that's incredibly important, right? And a lot of the things that you talk about are things that I've implemented in my life with, me and my wife are open about what things are important to us and how can we fit fitness into our busy lifestyle. So I definitely want to talk about those things, but I'd love to start with your origin story, for lack of better term. If you don't mind sharing who you are, how you grew up, and some of the things that you've done to lead to the success that you've had, because I won't, what's the term? Steal your light here, because I know you're going to share the story, but I know you've had also a fairly rough upbringing, similar to myself, and you've been able to turn that around and make something positive. Do you mind starting by sharing some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to make it as brief as possible, but, so
Take your
I'm
time, man. No rush.
not, but just to, because I want people to, if somebody's listening right now, I want you to know that out of all the quote influencers, all the podcasters, all the experts, I am so much like you. And hopefully you'll understand that as I explain, again, my little quick origin story. But, just really, really quick, so I was the youngest of 3, so my older brother and older sister are, like, 7 and 8 years older. I am significantly younger, and with that, I was babied a lot, and so when it came to, like, "Oh, what are we gonna have for dinner?" or whatever, my taste buds were already fried because all I ate all day long was like Cheerios, Doritos, all this super hyper palatable foods. So that when, it's funny because like, you look at restaurants and they're like, oh, authentic Mexican food. It doesn't get more authentic than a traditional Mexican woman creating a homemade meal. I didn't even know what like, authentic meant. That was just dinner. But
Yeah.
if you can imagine like the most amazing, like, pozole or like tacos or whatever you can imagine, I would look at that and be like, that hurts my stomach. I don't want to eat any of it because like my taste buds were completely fried from eating all the delicious, yummy, westernized food that when it came to actually dinner time, like I just didn't want to eat. It would frustrate the heck out of my parents, because again, they would put this plate of food in front of me and I would literally get nauseous because I didn't want to eat it. And then, went to the doctor and it's unfortunate, doctors didn't have any legit answers. They were like, "Oh, just let him eat whatever he wants to eat. At least he's getting some calories in versus not." Again, really frustrated my parents. They didn't know where to turn. They didn't have any answers because, again, this is stuff that just they never had to deal with, especially with their older kids. But thankfully, I was very active. But obviously, you can imagine being super active off of these empty calories. I was extremely skinny with that though, my gut, like everything that's inside of there was just so thrashed. So I got sick all the time. I was like, super depressed once I got into junior high and high school. Just a landslide of all kinds of really, really bad, health issues. Fast forward to like when I was about like, early 20s or whatever, I masked everything with alcohol. So really poor diet. And then you throw a lot of alcohol on top of that. It just made for a super unhealthy human. Uh, and then what happened was the person I was with at that time, we ended up getting married, got divorced less than a year later. And so that's when I was looking at myself and I'm like, okay, I would say I look like Mike Wazowski from Monsters Inc. Like I had skinny arms and legs, but a big old, beer belly. And I'm like, dude, all right, here I am, late 20s at this point. How am I going to attract another mate if I look like this? So I had no idea what to do. I was like, all right, running is the hardest thing, in my opinion, because it's boring and it takes a lot of work. I'm just going to start running. So I started like getting into jogging and stuff. Excuse me. And again, not knowing anything about nutrition, not knowing anything about fitness or whatever. But what that did was it actually led me to CrossFit because there was a really cool chick that was into CrossFit and I just wanted an excuse to hang out with her. She later became my wife and, we have kids now, but that was like the main thing that got me out of like the really poor eating habits and stuff because, I would still, have a drink or two and then I try to go do CrossFit the next day and I end up like throwing up everywhere. It was really, really bad. Um, but it's pretty interesting because like I'll see these transformations and, somebody will show a picture of them when they were like, a teenager or whatever. I have pictures of me being 27 years old, 160 pounds at 6 feet tall. I was very skinny, scrawny. I was like the smallest person you could ever think of. Fast forward to now, I'm at 39 and, I'm 185 pounds, feeling really, really good. But it was a huge struggle. It took many, many years. It took over a decade of making a lot of mistakes with lifting and figuring out the diet. Like I remember I used to like broccoli, chicken, and rice. That's what the bodybuilders eat. So that's what I'm gonna eat. And same thing, man. I would just start feeling sick. I would start gagging. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe this whole diet, fitness, and nutrition thing is just not for me because when I try to eat it, I get sick again. Like this isn't cool. So, you start to question and you start to doubt yourself and, having very little confidence already. And then to try to, to try to better yourself. And then you're still running into walls and stuff. You're just like, dude, like, am I ever going to figure this thing out? But, Fast forward a little bit more, I got into content creation, mainly with photography, and I ended up meeting Mark Bell. And at the time, he didn't have a photographer, and I met him at a seminar, and I just asked him like, "Hey, do power lifters need photos taken?" And he was like, "No, but I need a photographer." And I was like, "Holy, like, damn, this is cool." So gave him my card, ended up working, for free for a little bit, and then he offered me a full-time position, and that's when, like, I guess, like, the curve of, like, my health and fitness was, like, kind of already trending up because I got rid of alcohol, I got rid of a lot of, like, the silly, like, frivolous, like, calories that weren't helping me at all, and so it was kinda going up, but then as soon as I started working for Mark, that's when, like, stuff started really making sense because I was now surrounded with a bunch of people that actually knew what they were talking about. And then, fast forward a little bit more and, I'm following guys like you and I'm talking to people on the podcast and really, really starting to figure things out. But in line with all that, lots of trial and error because we talk to experts, right? There's the carnivore camp. We've had a couple of vegans on as well. We've had, flexible dieters and all that sort of stuff. And it's been a lot of trial and error because what ended up happening was I started just kind of falling to convenience. Like, oh, okay, Dr. Anthony Chaffee says, cholesterol doesn't matter. And all these studies that say that, this and that is like about meat is bad. Those studies were done wrong. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's okay. Cool. I like what he says. So I'm just going to avoid eating vegetables. And then I go over here and, it's like, oh, but what about like, this cholesterol, whatever, like, I'm going to ignore you. Like, okay. Well, we have Lane Norton on and he's like, yeah, sure. Have all the diet soda you want. It's going to take whatever. I forgot what it is. Like you have to drink like so many gallons for it to actually affect you or something. I don't even know. You're not a petri dish, right? So you're okay. Oh yeah, I'm gonna listen to him too. I'm gonna do that, and I'm gonna ignore the other person that's saying artificial sweeteners might cause this or that. And so what happened was I just like, all right, let me lean into the harder stuff. Okay, like I don't love vegetables, but there's obviously some benefit to eating some vegetables. All right, let me do that. No, there's probably nothing wrong with artificial sweeteners, but man, it's really, really easy to just reach for a Coke Zero than it is to reach for a glass of water. If we're looking at those two things, I think I can honestly like uh there's really no argument there to tell me which one is the better choice.
Sure.
So long as I'm not trying to go for like a weight loss thing or I don't have like an issue with like sweets or whatever. I'm gonna go for the water. And so that's kind of what I've been doing lately is just leaning into the stuff that I feel in my heart that is a little bit of a better choice,
Yeah.
and also that has, like, maybe some research behind it as well, but I don't really get stuck in the research, man, because there's a study for everything, so I just like to, reach for what's been working for me.
Yeah, no, that's great, man. You brought up a couple things there that I've realized are recurring themes amongst people that have success, whether it's with health and fitness, business, whatever it is, right? You mentioned that when you first started, you had no clue what to do, right? And you started following like bodybuilding style diets and you started noticing that it was messing with your stomach to a certain extent. And you realized that maybe that didn't work for you and you had to find a slightly different approach, right? I think what a couple of things that you mentioned are one, always having a beginner mindset, right? Understanding that we don't know everything. We need to learn, having an open mind, not only open mind, but really having a growth mindset, like being willing to adapt and learn and understand that you can get better with effort, right? Two, not feeling sorry for yourself and not quitting just because you're struggling, right? And I know you didn't go super in depth into some of these things, but you mentioned you had some stomach related issues. Uh, Drinking obviously doesn't help with that. I know you've had some low back injury and pain as well, which is super common for people. They're like, "Oh, yeah, I know that lifting weights is good and I would love to, but I can't because my back hurts." And they don't even put the effort into trying to maybe figure out a way to make it work for them specifically, right? And those are such powerful character traits is really what they are, right? What are some of those things? Why do you think you have some of those traits, man? Like some people obviously don't. What do you think contributed to that?
Yeah, dude. So, I mean, it was I was very lucky to have an older brother. You know, we look a lot alike, but he's again, like I said, he's a lot older, and he had like everything that I wanted. You know, he would lift and he would get a lot of muscle. I would lift, nothing would happen. I would just be in pain. You know, he could eat anything and he could get jacked. Like he was super athletic and super smart. He just kind of had all these things that I was like, dude, I want that. Like, how come I can't achieve that? And so I would always be like, oh, somehow he got all the genetics and I got none. But you're right. I did start to feel sorry for myself. I started to make all these excuses. You know, I grew up watching, you know, like Barry Bonds, Mark McGuire, Sammy Sosa, the home run race and all that. And then, of course, you know, once I, you know, watched Bigger, Stronger, Faster, and I realized like, oh, these guys were all on steroids. I'd be like, oh, that's probably what I need. You know, like that's the answer or whatever. But then I kind of just got real with myself, and I'm like, well, wait a second. I'm 6 feet tall. You know, I'm Mexican. That's I don't know how rare that is or that isn't. My brother, who has the exact same parents, he's able to figure it out. I'm like, okay, well, what's the difference? Like, okay, he ate a legit diet growing up. I didn't. Like, okay, so that's not necessarily my fault, but it's my doing. Okay, maybe I can reverse that. And then so when it came to the back pain, it was kind of the same thing. It's like, oh, woe is me. Like I have a broken back. Like my back is broken. You know, like I just
Do you
again
mind
started making.
do you mind quickly, sorry to interrupt you
No,
there,
no, good.
sharing the degree to which you were experiencing back pain? Because
Oh
I don't want
man.
people to think you're just like, "Oh, my back hurts a little bit." Like, really explain what you were going through there.
Yeah, so it started in so I graduated in 2003, and it was like a couple of friends of mine. I forgot what we were doing. We were driving. You know, I grew up in a like kind of like a country town just outside of Sacramento. Not much to do, so like we're down like a county road. We're at a stop sign because like some cars trying to turn left as we're trying to go straight. So we slow down. Drunk driver behind us, they're drunk drivers, and they just smashed the heck out of our car. And so that was in like 2004. And so ever since then, I had just like this weird, like, like my little back's kind of bugging me. Don't know if it was actually that event that caused the back pain, right? Because like we always can point to one thing, like, oh, it's because of this car accident, my back pain started. But in actuality, it could have been something before that or even after. Whatever the case, since 2004, I had some pretty legit back pain. As I got older, as I stopped moving as much, I started getting jobs where I sat down. So I had 2 jobs back to back where I sat down for 6 years straight. So 12 years total of just sitting at a desk. Not very good for movement.
Yeah.
My back pain was hurt. It caused so much pain that like needed help putting shoes and socks on. I couldn't go to the bathroom the way everybody else could, like because if I had to lean over just a little bit to flush the toilet, there was a possibility that I would collapse because it did happen where like I'd fall forward and I'd catch myself on the top of the toilet seat and like I'd push that lid off.
Mm.
And, you know, thankfully I never broke anything, but that would happen. Couldn't brush my teeth, couldn't wash my hands correctly. Everything had to be braced. There was never an opportunity like anything I ever did where my back pain didn't like compromise everything. My back pain dictated everything I did. So like, you know, it's you read these things about how deadlifts could help strengthen the back, or if you want to get rid of back pain, you got to strengthen your back. Okay, let me try all these things. It's like, dude, now I can't walk. Like I remember I fell inside the gym because I was doing a back squat. And you know, I just like I got stuck. I just got spooked. I thought I couldn't make the lift. So I threw the weight off my back. Um, Again, just trying to do all these things in the gym that I'm reading, that I'm being told, okay, I want to get stronger. So let me do these squats. I remember I got home that day and I was stuck in my car because I couldn't stand up. I had to like, you know, I had to like essentially crawl up my driveway because I couldn't move. It was the most demoralizing thing I've ever gone through. Very, very painful. You know, it's hard because, you know, you have at that time we had one kid and it was like how am I supposed to be the protector of this family if I can't even move? If anybody, in any shape came up to us and was, like, trying to rob us or something, I wouldn't be able to do anything because I was in so much pain that I couldn't move. So, it literally dictated and took over my entire life. So, yeah, man, the back pain was everything. It was really, really bad.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that up because it highlights the degree of resiliency that you have, right? Like unwillingness to give up. And I always think about this because that's obviously one of the character traits that I think are really important for people to have success. You can't give up. You're gonna face adversity. You have to keep going, right? I always wonder, like, I wonder if you developed that as a kid through experiences that you've had, or is it just genetics, or what it is, right? Because, for example, like, did you watch Arnold's documentary on
No, I
Netflix?
didn't. No.
No, there's a
Oh,
part where
it
he
was it
talks
like a
about his.
multi-part series?
Yeah, yeah, the newer one.
Okay, yeah, maybe shoot. Oh, I might have watched, I think, like, the
Yeah.
first part.
Well, there's a part where he's talking about, his brother, and I believe his brother committed suicide. I could be wrong about that, but his brother passed away. I'm pretty sure he committed suicide. And Arnold was talking about, all of the difficulties that he experienced as a kid and, like, their upbringing. And he mentioned that for him, it made him stronger and resilient and made him who he was, right? And for his brother, it had the opposite effect where, uh it made him depressed, he wasn't confident, etcetera, and he attributes it essentially just to genetics, right? Because both individuals had the same upbringing, yet completely different, reactions or results as a byproduct of that upbringing. And it's interesting, man, because I try to talk to my clients about this too, and when I work with clients, I notice there's 2 types of people when it comes to this thing in particular. Um, and I can almost pick up immediately on what sort of clients are gonna have more success than others right off the bat, in the sense that, like, the people that are gonna have success are willing to figure out what they need to do, right? Like, "Oh, I'm going through this, but what do I need to do?" I share advice, they implement it right away. If they encounter another struggle or obstacle, for example, you hurting your back doing a squat, right? For some people, that would be an immediate, I'm never stepping in the gym again. I'm never grabbing a barbell, right? And that's the type of person that I've realized doesn't have that sort of long term success. Whereas the other type of person may think, okay, this thing in this instance hurt me. Maybe I can figure out a different way to do this thing that will actually be beneficial and continuing to push forward. So that's it's a important insight because I feel like oftentimes people just look for hacks or secrets to achieve a particular outcome, and the truth is that there's a lot of hardship on the road to achieve any outcome really, whether it's business, fitness, or whatnot, right?
Yeah, and I think, because like, I never would have labeled myself as resilient or anything like that. I think I was just tired of, like, getting crapped on all the time,
Yeah.
growing up, especially because like, I hated school and, everybody knew it. It was, like, really boring to me, and I didn't really see the point. I didn't understand it. And I remember a high school teacher. I got thrown out of class for something stupid. Like, I never had, like, any, like, pen, paper, all that. Like, I didn't have anything with me. I just showed up because
Same here, man.
yeah, because check this out, like, I had a police officer show up at my house and was like, "Hey, you're going to jail if you don't go to school." And I'm like, "Goodness, like, if those are my only 2 options, then I guess I'm gonna go to school." So I would just show up at school just so I didn't get thrown in jail, according to what this cop told me. And it was one of those things where like, "Hey, if you don't come prepared for class tomorrow, you're not gonna be in class." And, whatever, I called her on her bluff, and I was like, "Whatever, I don't wanna be in this class anyway." So, like, I would get thrown out, and I would just, like, go find some friends and hang out. But out on my way out, she pointed at me and she was like, "Here's an example of somebody that's going nowhere in life." And, like,
Mhm.
that stuck with me for so long, and, like, I don't wanna be that revengeful person and hang on to that kind of thing, but, it was kind of like, "Hey, I'm gonna prove you wrong," type of thing. When it came to my back pain, I was proving my back pain wrong. That was my thing. Like, it wasn't necessarily like I'm gonna prove myself wrong or like somebody said something. It was more like, for whatever reason, it was like my back pain was the enemy, not my back, but this thing that's causing me pain. Like, this is like a really like a big enemy. and it's doing everything it can to play dirty and all these things. And I was like, I'm going to prove you wrong as well. And so that's kind of what it was for me. I was like, dude, I want to get better. I want to, because at that point I didn't have my son yet. I was like, but eventually when I have kids, like I want to be able to, roll on the ground and not have to worry about like, oh, my back hurts, I can't hold you, or that sort of thing. So that was a huge motivator for me for sure.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, man. I wanted to transition to talking about fitness specifically in the context of parenting, right? Because we're talking about obstacles, and I would never call having a kid an obstacle, but many people do use it as a reason to let their health and their fitness kind of go to shit, right? Um, what are some things that helped you navigate becoming a new parent, staying on top of your health and fitness, maybe from a mindset perspective, and then also some objective small things that people can do to still prioritize their health and fitness, even though they're becoming a parent? And I ask this question because one of the most common, like, avatar in terms of clients that hire me are people who are newer parents, right? And they're just like, maybe not brand new parents, maybe they've had a kid for a year now, and they're like, man, like I've gained whatever number it is, 20, 30, 40 pounds in the past year. I used to be healthy and fit, and now I just don't know what to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was absolutely a big mind shift once my son came. So just a little bit more background. So my stepdaughter, she's now 15, going on 16, and my son is 3. So we kind of went through it once, but I met her when she was 4, so we were kind of already like through the difficult stage, and then having my son a freshie, everything started brand new for me. So yeah, it was a huge shift, and that shift mainly, went from, "All right, I'm gonna go kill it in the gym. Okay, we're gonna be in here for an hour, hour and a half. I got my program. I'm gonna follow that program. I have X amount of sets. I got X amount of reps per set. All right, let's go. I got my pre-workout. I got my pre-workout meal in. I got my post-workout meal ready to go. Like, all right, this is a workout." It went from that to, all right, let me see if I can get one superset in before my son wakes up, right? It went to that. And then it also changed from, all right, my workout's going to start at 6 a.m. and, it's going to end whenever it ends. It switched to, I'm going to have to get up a little bit earlier because he's been waking up at 6. So I'm probably going to have to wake up around 4 or 5 o'clock just to get that workout in. And if I don't kill it, if I don't end up feeling like Ronnie Coleman after this workout, that's okay. And it's also okay if I go back to that workout later on. And it's also okay if that workout looks like, 10, 15 minutes on the treadmill, like, with a good little incline, or a walk around the block, right? It doesn't have to be something where, you're training for the CrossFit games. And if it's anything less than you failed, like that's been the hardest thing that I've seen a lot of people struggle with. And that is, okay, I'm not gonna be able to get in my hour and a half workout in, so whatever, I'll do it later, or I just won't do it at all. Like, no, like, just getting up, moving, even doing like a mobility routine or something counts as a workout. Is that gonna get you, to your goals as fast as you want? No. But is it gonna get you to your goals eventually? Of course, right? Doing nothing is gonna keep you in the exact same space or spot. Doing a little something is definitely gonna push you forward. So, it went from, again, trying to kill myself and, like, "Let's go," to, "Hey, let's just take one step forward."
Yeah, that's a great point, man. And this is a very similar conversation to one that I've had very recently. Again, I keep bringing up clients because I talk to my clients on a daily basis. So it just stories relate. I'm working with a client who's a new mom, and it was similar conversation about workouts. Right? It's like being nervous about not being able to go to the gym and spend an hour lifting 3 or 4 times a week. That causes some people a lot of anxiety and stress. And I understand why, right? Because you love this one thing, you've been doing it this way for so long, and now you just can't, at least for a period of time, right? It's not like that forever. And the one conversation, and so as a result, for a couple of months, she essentially wasn't doing any exercise at all. Right. And so we had this conversation. I'm like, listen, I know it's difficult. I know it's not easy, but understand that you can still do something even if it's 20 minutes at home, right? And then it was, oh, but the baby, can't be left alone. Okay, hold on to the baby and do some squats at home while holding on to the baby, and you turn it into some playtime with the baby as well, right? So there are creative ways to get around those things. I remember, because my wife is equally into the gym as I am, and our son is now 20 months old, so a little past a year and a half. And when we first had him, one of the main conversations we had was like, how are we going to make time for the gym? Right. So my wife is against babysitters and against daycare at gyms because she doesn't want the baby getting sick. Right. I know you guys are too. And so one of the things we talked about was like, man, we need to find a gym that just lets us bring the baby with us on the floor. And so we spent a couple hours like calling a couple of local gyms. We found the small spot that let us go in. And so he would come in and he would just chill in the stroller and we would lift. Now we can't do that because he doesn't sit still. So now we've had a conversation about like taking turns, right? And making some sacrifices when it comes to work and this and that. And, I talk about these things because people oftentimes are like, oh, you're lucky to be in the situation that you're in, that you work from home and you can do this. And it's partially true, right? I think, I, I'm I see this in two ways. Like I'm all about extreme ownership and taking charge of like your life and everything, but I also realize that many of the things that we face in life are due to luck, right? Like could have been born somewhere else with not nearly as many luxuries as I have. So it is both. But at the same time, you have to put in the effort to make the best out of the situation that you're in, right? And I that's a recurring theme that I hear in your story as well. It's like, yes, we all have obstacles, but there are creative ways that you can make stuff work. And maybe it doesn't work in the exact way that you want it to, but you can still make it work. And like you said, you still make progress, maybe not as fast. It's okay. It's also important to understand that this is just a phase in life as well, right? There are difficult times, they get easier. It's an obstacle like anything else. Yeah, and so I relate to your story a ton when it comes to that.
Yeah, we do get that a lot as well. It's like, "Oh, it must be nice," like, all you guys do is lift and podcast or whatever. It's like, "Hey, we have other responsibilities as well," same thing with the diet. We look at, a big, amazing, delicious looking pizza. We want that just as bad as everybody else, but we have these habits set in, and we know what it's like when we consume that, what it does to us mentally, physically, moving forward. Does that help us get closer to our goals? It's like, well, I mean, you can make an argument that it'll make you happy for a little bit and you'll be fine. But at the same time, we just know that, like, that's kind of like pulling us away from what we're
Sure.
actually ultimately trying to do, right? And as far as the whole like gym thing, yes, I work at a place that has a full on gym inside of it. I typically don't really get full workouts there anyways. I'll do like what we call microdosing, which we'll get into in a second. But for the most part, I train at home because even with, having access to a gym whenever I want, I still would rather be at home. So that way, my family has more access to me. I save way more time when I just walk outside into my garage and train versus loading up, doing the whole ritual of, all right, I'm going to wear these shorts today. I'm going to wear that shirt today. And, I just like, I'll walk out in my pajamas and get a lift in. So
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. Like I built my life around this. So that way there's less friction there. Right. Same thing with my wife. She does her workouts inside the house. And what's amazing, and I really want parents to understand this, one of the best things you can do for your child is allow them to watch you work out. Like there's almost
Totally.
nothing better, if you can normalize working out, normalize exercise, normalize moving, then they're going to have a really really good shot at being healthy versus, normalizing Netflix every night, normalizing, ice cream every night. Like, I'm not judging anybody, but we see what's happening to our youth, right? Like, they're not getting smaller, they're only getting bigger. So, it's unfortunate that this burden has been put on you, but it's no longer just about you anymore. it's kind of your responsibility to set a really good example for your child so that way they have an opportunity, right? Like, give them a shot. And the way you do that is just by giving them an example and normalizing all these healthy habits.
Yeah, I'm so happy you brought that up because um, one of the things that I've always mentioned that I feel that I'm most fortunate about or most appreciative about is that I grew up in the gym as a kid. Like my mom was all about being healthy, always cooked healthy meals. Uh, I was in the gym like as far back as I can remember. Some of my earliest memories are in the gym playing with my mom's trainer's kids because we would all like my mom's trainer owned the gym. We would go there. It was down the street. We would go there every day, and I would just hang out in the little room and like I would play video games and stuff. Like I would see my mom working out. Like it definitely had an influence because I remember being under 10 years old and like wanting to lift weights and my mom was just like, "No, you have to wait till you're 16 because whatever, it's gonna stunt your growth or whatever it is." But, I that's what I saw my whole life, and my
Yeah.
dad similarly, my dad wouldn't really go to the gym, but he would come home from work and, like, do push-ups and do some sit-ups at home, and, like, it's it's definitely super helpful for your kids to see that, right? And I think maybe one thing that because I'm big on, like, the way you frame things, the way you think about things, right? And even just thinking like, "Hey, I have to do these things because it's gonna have a positive impact on my kid's life," might be a bigger motivating factor for some people. Because sometimes people are like, "Ah, I don't really care about myself." But most people definitely care about their kids, right? And if you want what's best for your kids and you care about your kids more than you, then you should definitely be prioritizing these things.
Yeah, and it's
One
and
thing I
it's
w
it's
go ahead,
also
sorry.
no, I just wanted to point out that it's your kids, your grandkids, and potentially some people that you'll never meet, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, we've seen that this has generational impacts, right? So, like, whatever happened to my gut, the way, like, I was eating or whatever, like, my lifestyle could have happened because of my great-grandparents, right? It
Yeah.
sticks around for what I think what is it, like, 4 or 5 generations, like, whatever you do today is really about your, your line. And so, again, not to put, like, a crazy burden on, like, "Oh, should I go to the gym today?" Like, well, shit, if you're tired, then, go ahead and rest up, but understand that, like, hey, implementing some simple, easy to follow habits is gonna have generational impact.
Yeah, totally. That's a great point, man, and also highlighting because sometimes people feel so much pressure when they're first starting try to do everything at once. It's like, man, just start slow, right? Like if you're new to this and you have kids and you're busy and you have a career and all these other things going on, there's nothing wrong with starting with one workout a week if you currently don't do any, right? This is I know something that you guys talk a ton about on the Power Project of like minimum effective dose on a daily basis, right? Like
Mhm.
maybe it's just a 15-minute walk to start. Maybe it's just one workout with or maybe it's just push-ups to start. It's something super small. And objectively, is that gonna make big impact on your body? No, but what it is gonna do is help you stack small wins that make you more motivated to do the next thing, right?
Yeah.
If you think about it like, for example, you with your podcasting stuff and your filmmaking stuff, you didn't go from not knowing anything to having a podcast studio and having a course and doing this 100% the next day. And that's such an obvious example, like, yeah, you can't do that, right? Step 1 is maybe learn about cameras. Step 2 is maybe learn about how to take pictures. Step 3, buy a camera. Step 4, start doing it. Yet people don't take that approach with fitness at all, man.
No.
I tell the story because it makes me laugh. My wife's uncle is somebody who's struggled with his weight his whole life, and not just with his weight, but weight loss and weight regain over and over. Like he's lost drastic amounts of weight. I mean, like 50 plus pounds in a short period of time and then regains it all. And it's because he does these super restrictive like diets and crazy workout plans and they never stick because he doesn't start small. He had a conversation with me. He's like, man, Joey, I'm trying to lose weight. What should I do? And I was like, well, what are you planning on doing? Because I know you already have a plan. And he goes, well, I'm going to do Orange Theory twice a day, every day until I lose. It was like 30 or 40 pounds or something. I was like, and then I asked him, and literally my next question was, okay, what are you gonna do when you lose the weight? And he laughs and he's like, I'm gonna stop doing Orange Theory. And I'm like, dude, there's the issue. You think you can do it twice a week forever? And he's like, oh yeah. And I'm like, all right, let's do that. Anyways, my advice did not resonate with him at all. But it's just funny, man, because so many people take that approach. And That's one of the things that I try to talk to people about. One of the main things I'm trying to talk to my audience about when I put together this webinar too. It's like that's one of the main things that hold people back from making long-term progress. It's like the intent is great. You're motivated. Fantastic. You want to do all these things? Great. But please, 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 for the love of God, try to start small and then slowly build upon that.
Yeah, yeah, we'll say sometimes, like, your workouts should be so easy that you almost feel lazy for doing them. You know, like, if you go and crush your whole body and you can't walk the next day, like, that was just too much. But if you go in there and, you do one exercise and then you leave, you almost feel like, "Oh, that was almost like a waste of time." But guess what? You can go back and do it again the next day. And, yeah, as far as, like, your wife's uncle, it's people love challenges, right? A 30-day
Yeah.
challenge, no disrespect, but, 75 hard, and it's like, anytime somebody comes to me and they're like, "I wanna do 75 hard," I will say, "Alright, cool, you can. Cut whatever the requirements are, cut that in half, and then whatever that is, cut that in half again and see if you can do it for a couple weeks." Because if you set out to do all these things for 75 days straight, if you get through it, by the time you're done, you might be completely fried because you aren't doing anything, period. To jump into something like that is just way too much. And so what I like to remind people is, like the orange theory, whatever it is, the 75 hard, if you regain the weight, it's not because the thing didn't work. It's your habits, right? Like your diet, your workout plan, none of that failed you. Your habits did. So if you implement just a couple of really good habits and you just follow those on a regular basis for a long time, and it the challenge doesn't end after 30 days. This is also a really, really hard concept for many people. It is, all right, how long do I have to do this ketogenic diet thing? Or how long do I have to monitor the food that I eat? And my answer is forever. Like, but you aren't
Yeah.
you aren't gonna be this 30-day challenge person. You're not gonna, do this 75 hard thing. You are just going to become a healthier person, right?
Yeah.
You are not gonna be the, whatever guy or the whatever girl. You're just gonna be the person that's healthy. You're gonna be the person that eats right. You're gonna become the person that goes to the gym on a regular basis. You're not gonna be the challenge person. You're not gonna be the yo-yo dieter. You're just gonna become a different person. And when you become that person, forever all of a sudden is just like a positive thing because you love the way you feel. And once people can kind of click over to that and understand that aspect, everything almost falls in place. Cause that's kind of what happened to me. I started feeling better when I stopped drinking. I started feeling better when I started getting rid of like processed foods. I started getting way better back pain wise when I started leaning into jujitsu. Like I started leaning into the things that I thought that I wasn't able to do, and all of a sudden now everything starts feeling better. And I'm not doing that until I reach my goal weight, until I reach my pain threshold.
Yeah.
I've just become a different person.
Yeah. It's such a, the phrase that I like to use to summarize what my philosophy is with health and fitness is simply that your health and your body are a delayed reflection of your daily habits, right? Because the shit that you do today isn't going to influence your body today, but it's the culmination of the stuff that you do every day that will influence your body, right?
Mhm.
And it's so important for people to understand that, man. Like, yeah, with these challenges, for example, like you mentioned, 75 hard. It's not that uh, the challenge failed you; it's your habits. But in reality, too, we can also think of it as like because people, if they go through 75 hard and they've never done anything to take care of their body, they're probably gonna see some pretty cool results, right? They'll probably lose some weight, they'll probably feel better. Maybe they'll be exhausted by the end, but they'll probably see some pretty cool results, right? And what they don't realize is not that like they needed to do this thing one time to get this result. It's that like, hey, doing this thing every day is what got you to that result. And if you want to maintain that, then you gotta keep doing this thing every day, right?
Mhm.
It's like I did this and now I'm here and now I stop. Right now you stop and then what? You go back to your old lifestyle. Like people don't realize that their old lifestyle is what contributed to them being a certain way, right? I don't know why it's so hard for that to click for some people because it is so painfully obvious.
Yeah, it's when you equate it to money, that's when stuff starts to make a lot more sense. If I go to work today today I'm not getting paid, but if I do that over the span of a month, well, we'll say 2 weeks because people traditionally get paid every 2 weeks. If I work for 14 days, then I'll collect a paycheck at the end of, or not 14 days, sorry, I'm all over the place. At the end of 2 weeks, I'll collect a
Sure.
paycheck. If I don't go to work the next 2 weeks, I'm
Not getting any.
not gonna get anything. And then what Lane Norton said a while back, I always loved this, and this is for the calories in, calories out thing. How do you become rich? Like, how do you become wealthy? It's like, oh, you spend a little bit less than you make.
Yep.
Right? That's how you make more or you become rich.
You build
And so
wealth. Yeah.
when it comes to calories, it's the same thing. Like, how do you lose weight? It's like, well, you eat a little bit less than or sorry, you know what I mean? You eat a little bit less and then you burn or whatever. But it's like, yeah, when it comes to the habits and stuff, it's like it's not a magic pill. It's not a I keep saying keto, but like it's not the keto diet, right? It's
Yeah.
just a culmination of everything you do and how you carry yourself.
Yeah. The issue is you can't monetize habits too well.
Ah, I know, man. Dang. Could you imagine?
Oh, man.
Well, I guess you
Dude,
can't with, like,
so
habit trackers, but, whatever.
yeah. Yeah. No, it's funny because I think of myself from, like, a business standpoint too, like, how hard it is to compete with people that sell magic pills, right? Because there are so many of those.
And
Like,
that's what I
this
love about your content, dude, because, like, we talked about this before. It's like the fact that you're getting attention for being
basic stuff.
yeah, for being real and for just saying stuff that's just honest and factual and true. Like, you're not sitting here talking about eating liver pills or whatever, right? Like, you're just giving just some baseline information, but you're
Yeah.
doing it in a way that's, like, resonating with a lot of people, probably upsetting a lot of people, which is also a good thing, but you're not having to, like, say some outlandish stuff that's like, "Wait a second, like, I think I have to, like, question this guy." You look at the
Yeah.
stuff and you're like, "Oh, can't really find too much fault here," and that's rare that that is what gets attention.
Totally, and for me, it's just been trying to figure out strategies to make things more entertaining too. I think if you're analytical about content creation, stuff like that, you can find patterns that, help videos do better and stuff. You know all about that.
Yeah.
Um, dude, one thing I wanted to ask you, because I think this is incredibly important too, like, when you have kids, yes, things are more difficult, and I think it is so, so, so important to be on the same page, with your partner, right? And so for me, one of the things that has helped more than anything, because people oftentimes ask me like, "How do you make time for the gym when you have a kid? How do you do this? How do you do that?" Like almost they want like a secret hack or something again, right? And for me, it's always like it starts with having conversations with my wife. Like I told her, "Hey, when she was pregnant, when baby's on the way, like for me, it's really important to still be able to get my workouts in. And you tell me what you need to be able to make that happen, like what support do you need from me so that I can have an hour and a half, a couple times a week to go work out?" And those conversations have been super helpful, right? Because I feel like sometimes there can be so much, maybe like built up frustration towards your partner. And it oftentimes comes from a lack of communication, right? Like people didn't express what they were feeling, they didn't talk about what they wanted, they're upset. And for me, it's always been like, and I'm not going to say I'm perfect at this. We all make our mistakes, right? But it's something that I continuously try to improve upon is communication with my wife. Because I notice that every time we have the hard conversations, it always has a positive outcome, right? So for the gym, it's like, man, like this is important to me. How can we make this happen? What's important to you? How can I make that happen for you? For me, nutrition is important. What can we do together to make it easier to eat healthy? What sorts of conversations have you had with your wife and how has that helped?
Yeah, dude, what a concept, right? Talking. I,
It's
I
hard.
I know it can be hard. I
Mhm.
I think, when it comes to, saying you got lucky or, like, my situation's a little different than everybody, I definitely can agree. My wife is incredible. It's been a really easy transition with my son. But I will hear this exact same question or something along the same lines, I should say, in regards to like, oh, when am I supposed to find time to podcast if I want to start this thing that's not really making money or it's taking more time away from me and the family? Like, what am I supposed to do? And it's like, well, have you talked to your partner about it? Like, have you let her know that this is important to you and that you plan on doing it at a time where you're not really necessarily needed? And so that's kind of the approach that I also take to fitness. And, for us, again, because this is stuff that we already have like established, we have all these habits already set. There wasn't too much of a like hard sit down conversation, but it was just more like, "Hey, like, that, like, I train in the mornings. I go to jujitsu at 5:30. I train around the same time every other day. Like, that, like, this is when I'm going to be doing it because this is when our son's still asleep. This is when nobody really needs me," right? Like, our daughter's still asleep at that time, our son's still asleep at that time. She's getting her workout in around the same time as well. So, again, if this is a struggle or if this is a roadblock or a pain point, I think you just need to get real with your partner and understand that like you're going to have to go through some of these difficult conversations in order to, like you said, like to progress forward. And I think it is super important. Um, I don't, I'm going to say as a man, right? I can only speak from my experience as a man that we have to take it upon ourselves to really make our whatever we want, whether it be the gym, podcasting, jujitsu, whatever it may be, we have to set it at a time where it's not going to pull from anything else, right? Like if I if I tell my wife, "Hey, every Saturday around 1 o'clock, I'm gonna be in the gym for like 3 hours. Don't bother me," whatever. It's like that's gonna be a huge different reaction than if I say,
Of
"Hey, every day
course.
at 4 a.m., I'm gonna wake up. I'm gonna get my workout in." And then that way, by the time you guys wake up around 6 or 7, I'm already a couple hours in and I'm ready to go, right? Like those are two very different scenarios. And sometimes, you have to do these things to, you have to do the harder thing, right? But what that did for me was, man, it made me level up quite a bit, right? I
Yeah.
wasn't always a morning person. I would still say I'm not because I wake up and I'm like, here we go again. But
Yeah.
once you get going and there's something special about that 4 a.m. hour where like nobody's awake, it's quiet, and you're just being a savage by yourself. You're either lifting or you're getting choked out by a bunch of dudes at jujitsu. Um, it
That
just,
sounds wrong.
oh, dude, it gets so weird at jujitsu. Trust me. Lots of sweat, lots of grunting, lots of man on man friction. It's weird, but it makes you level up, and it's like a whole training thing again, it's like your first day in the gym, like, were you benching 225? It's like, no, you had to work your way up,
Yeah.
and so this is, like, one of those things that's just gonna help you level up for sure.
Yeah, man, and one thing I wanted to follow up with there is also understanding that, like, mm, having the difficult conversation doesn't mean you're gonna get it your way 100% either, right?
That's
Because
very important. Yeah.
some sacrifices have to be made. For example, the sacrifice you make is just to wake up earlier, to not impede on anything else, right? And this is also where, I mean, all of these topics bleed into each other, the importance of prioritizing and really knowing what your priorities are, right? Because oftentimes you hear this like, "Oh, I can't make it to the gym because whatever." Okay, then invest a little bit of money into getting some equipment at home. Well, I can't really afford that. Okay, well, do you have some books and can you put that in a book bag and work out with your book bag at home? Yeah, but I don't really like that. It's like, listen, man, you just don't care about this actually,
Mhm.
right? Like that's the harsh truth. It's like you say it's important, but your actions don't show that it's important whatsoever. Because if
Yeah.
it is important, you find a way to do it.
No,
For example, like, man, I started making content with like no experience, just my phone, record it and just do it, right? And it's like some people you could apply this to anything. Some people are like, "Oh, I don't have the camera, I don't have the mic, I don't have the lighting, I don't have the experience." Like, just do it. Just do it, right? If it's a priority, just do it. And this is something I talk to clients about a lot too, man, because like sometimes we say something is important, but we haven't given it any thought, and then we realize it's actually not important, right? And sometimes having that thought makes you realize, like, "Oh shit, I need to change things up." Or the opposite of like, "Oh, like I'm getting frustrated over something that doesn't really matter." Right?
Mhm.
And I've mentioned this so many times in the podcast because I think it's such an important mental exercise to go through is because people only think past one level. They're like, "What are my goals? Oh, these are my goals. These are what I want. This is what I want." And that's typically it. Nobody typically goes the next step below that, and it's like, "All right, well, what changes and sacrifices do I need to make to achieve that goal?" Right? And I've a client that I'm working with now, it's like his friends may not be the best influence for his health goals. And he goes out to eat every weekend multiple times, and there's always a lot of alcohol involved. And I've had this conversation with him. I'm like, man, like he has a young kid too. I'm like, what are your priorities? Right? Like, do you want to be healthy? Do you want to have a health scare? The issue too is sometimes unfortunately people don't make changes until they've had a big health scare.
Mm.
Right. And like when you're young, you can get away with a lot. This client's relatively young. It's like it hasn't hit him that, like, these behaviors aren't beneficial, right? And I've talked to him, I'm like, "Hey, man, if the influences that you have from your friends aren't positive, have a conversation with your friends about these things, and if they're truly your friends, they should support you," right? And sometimes that really helps people realize, like, "Shit, I need to change these things." I've also seen the opposite been true too, where I've had clients who are already in really good shape. Like, for example, Andrew, you're a healthy guy. I'm a healthy guy. Neither you or I are the most jacked people in the world, and neither you or I have a ripped six pack, right? I could sit here and say, yeah, I would want those things. Would it be cool to have those things? Sure. Would it be cool if you and I looked like Ensema? Yeah, that'd be cool, right? Like, it'd be cool. But if I think about for myself, what would I need to do, right? I already eat really healthy throughout the week, and I have a really busy work schedule, and I spend time with my son. I would need to take time away from work to be a little bit more active. That's the objective truth. I would need to probably give up going out to eat once a week with my wife because, like, my diet at home is already healthy. I would maybe, if I wanted to get jacked, have to hop on PEDs. That's the truth. For me, those sacrifices are not worth it at all. So I know that that's not the right goal for me and I'm happy, right? Because sometimes so many people are so frustrated that they can't achieve something when in reality, it's just not the right goal in the first place
Dude, yeah, and social media doesn't help with any of that, and by the way, you
at
are
all.
jacked and ripped, and I think you're doing just fine, brother. But yeah, so
Put a ring on it, bro.
I I got so lost in all of that, right? I wanted, the six pack. Like I did take PEDs to try to get that six pack, like
Yeah,
I've done a lot of dumb stuff in pursuit of what I thought I like, oh yeah, once I get that physique, I'll be happy.
yeah,
I've gotten shredded for photo shoots a couple times, and at the end of each of those, I was like, "All right, I'm not gonna do it this time." And I was talking
yeah,
about yo-yo dieting. I'm like, "I'm gonna maintain this, and I'm gonna be, I'm just gonna stay shredded, and I'm gonna just live my life and be happy." And you're right, dude. The sacrifices that I had to make to do that were just like they're just ridiculous. Like I got down to, so again, I talked about how like I started at like 160. Right now I'm 185. I remember I shriveled up down to 162 to try
mhm,
to get lean for a photo shoot, and in that moment, I was like, "Yeah, I got abs, like, I feel great." I looked at the pictures not too long ago, dude, I looked like such a string bean, like, I looked gross, but I was so proud of myself for doing it, and so what
yeah,
happens then, if I'm walking around, you know, at about 180 pounds and I lose almost 20 pounds, what do you think happened? I ballooned up, like, in an instant. So, what I did was I just started leaning into the habits, and I was like, "You know what? I'm gonna be protein first, gonna stay active in the gym, active in jujitsu," and I ended up getting the physique that I truly wanted, and I didn't have to do, like, anything too dramatic. I guess sorry, let me take that back because training about 6 times a week is pretty dramatic, but I was doing things that I love to do.
yeah,
None of it felt like a chore. The food I was eating, which I would love to get into that conversation next,
yeah,
but the food I was eating was all good stuff, I was eating a ton of eggs for breakfast, big steaks for dinner, a bunch of protein shakes and that sort of thing, and I felt good, and I didn't care about where the physique, like, looks ended up. I just wanted to make sure that I performed well in the gym and well on the mats, and that ended up helping me get the physique that I've always wanted. Now recently, I've taken some time off of the mats just because I've been putting together this podcast course, But getting back into it, it's like, "Oh, like, yeah, I remember what this feels like," being, like, soaked in, like, my own sweat and stuff, and it's been feeling really, really good. But yeah, man, we can't get lost in what it takes to obtain these insane physiques. You bring up Nsima, and yeah, the guy's a specimen, but he's been doing it since he was 13
Yeah.
nonstop, right? And I watch this guy work out, and he doesn't really kill himself anymore, but he does it nonstop. He trains jujitsu every day, nonstop. He eats very well nonstop,
Yeah, yeah.
and the physique lands wherever it may because of the really good habits.
Hey guys, some of you may not know that I'm the scientific advisor for a supplement company called Outwork Nutrition. I help with the formulation of new products to help ensure that they're effective and backed by science. Unlike many other supplement companies out there, we don't rely on exaggerated claims or flashy marketing tactics. Instead, we let the science speak for itself. We take pride in formulating products that deliver real results, helping you achieve your fitness goals in a meaningful way. If you're in the market for supplements like protein powder, pre-workout, or recovery products, make sure to check us out at outworknutrition.com. And as a thank you for being an avid listener of this podcast, use code Joey for an exclusive discount at checkout. You can find the link to our website down in the description of this podcast episode. Remember, our goal is to empower you with science-backed supplements that truly make a difference. Choose Outwork Nutrition and elevate your fitness to new heights. Yeah, totally. And it's again even this because we all fall into this, man. Like I know these things and I fall into these things too. Like there are periods of times every once in a while I'm like, fuck it, I'm gonna get shredded.
Yeah.
Like that happens probably once a year, right? And then and this happens every year. I lose about 10 pounds and then I start to realize that like it doesn't mean anything to me. Like it just doesn't mean anything, right? Like where I'm at right now, I can maintain comfortably. I feel good with my shirt off. I f- I perform well in the gym. I get to enjoy food the way that I want to. And as soon as I start like feeling a little bit weaker in the gym or feeling hungry from day to day, and I'm not gonna lie, for me, my priority is my business. And when I'm hungry, I can't work the same way. I can't focus on work if I'm hungry. And I start seeing the negative impacts. I'm like, forget this, bro. Right. And that's what I was trying to refer to, that like sometimes we have certain goals and like it would be cool to achieve those goals, but the changes that need to be made to achieve that goal may not be worth it for you in that given circumstance, right? And for me, it's that, man. It's like, yeah, I could be leaner, but like, what does it mean? It doesn't really mean jack shit, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's crazy, like, I actually can feel when I haven't refueled, so,
Yeah,
I'll, like, start dozing off in the middle of the day, and it's like, "Dude, what's going on? Like, come on, man, I'm doing everything right," and then I realize, like, "Well, dude, your breakfast was a little small, you didn't have a
yeah,
meal in the middle of the day, and you're waiting for dinner," like, "Yeah, dude, you didn't eat enough," and
yeah,
you can look at that 2 ways. You can look at it as one as like, "Oh, sick, I'm in a deficit right now." But the way I was looking at it was like, "Dude, I'm not being a good dad." Like, I need to go, whatever, refuel a little bit
yeah,
better. Yeah.
yeah. Dude, so let's definitely talk about nutrition. I want to start this conversation because although we're talking about habits are the most important thing, you need to focus on behaviors. There are little things that you can do here and there to make things easier, right? Because at the end of the day, whatever you do needs to feel easy to be sustainable. You mentioned something important. You were training 6 days a week, but you enjoy it. It's not a chore. You don't hate it. So it's enjoyable. So it's sustainable. Are there certain tips or things that you do with your nutrition specifically to make it easy?
Yeah, dude, so I've had quite a cool, nutrition journey, right? Like, what I talked early about how, like, I just kind of ate all the garbage and somehow survived on all that. Had the struggles of trying to follow a bodybuilding diet, and I messed with, like, a keto diet. I messed with everything. And then, I found well, through having him on the podcast, I started following the Vertical Diet by Stan Efferding, and then eventually even like a carnivore diet from Sean Baker, like, because we had him on the show, and that was really where I was like, "Whoa." Like, once I get the nutrition dialed in, I air quote "dialed in" just because, like, I was actually following a plan, like, to the T, right? It's pretty easy to follow a carnivore diet. Um, I realized, like, "Whoa, dude, like, my back feels pretty good right now." Like, alright, like, I'm actually making some decent progress. But then I ran into the unsustainability of a carnivore diet. And then again, kind of going back to the ground beef and rice of the vertical diet, that started feeling pretty good. But then I couldn't figure out like, but man, I'm not really like getting lean. Like, what's going on? And I'm looking at my meals, and it's like majority rice with a little bit of ground beef because I wanted to make it delicious.
Yeah.
So more exploring, I started, counting calories and doing that sort of thing, like making sure everything fit my macros. Started following Lane Norton, doing a lot of that stuff. And I found a lot of success there, like high protein, high carb, low fat. It was awesome because I was having these really yummy foods and the protein was high. I was getting leaner and everything was cool, but my stomach was still in a lot of pain. If I was honest with myself, I would have a lot of, like a lot of stuff with sucralose. I would have a lot of diet sodas. I did a lot of stuff that was, like I said, high protein, almost no fat, and high carbs. And it was just kind of like I always had like this bomb in my stomach. But once I got rid of that bomb, I was feeling pretty good and I would look pretty good. So fast forward a little bit more. I just, I was like, when I have this low fat foods, my stomach hurts. Let me mix in a little bit more fats. So I went from having like a ton of egg whites and like bread to having a ton of egg whites with some whole eggs. All right, my stomach doesn't feel so bad anymore. Okay, add a little bit more eggs. And so what happened was like my egg whites to whole eggs was like way lopsided. And then it went the other way to the point where I was just having 10 eggs and toast for breakfast every day. And that made me feel great. I was like, dude, this is awesome. And then what was really good, and this is a really cool hack, is I was so full from breakfast, I wouldn't be hungry till like dinner time around 5 or 6 o'clock. So as far as like something that's going to help you get more work done, something that's going to make you more productive. It's not caffeine, it's not like some nootropics or whatever. It's just simply not thinking about food all day long because I was so full from breakfast. That fueled
Yeah.
me all the way through my entire day. When I would get home, it would just be a really big, awesome, delicious steak with some rice. And at that time, it was just like with like a Coke Zero or a root beer zero, and then I would end my day with like a really big protein shake. So I really had 2 to 3 meals a day, right? Anytime food, went into my mouth, it was considered a meal, and I just didn't eat in the middle of the day, and
Yeah.
that's where I had the absolute most success. Like, I started getting shredded, I wasn't hungry, I felt fueled for the day, everything felt freaking awesome, and I that's where I had the absolute most success. Since then, I've been trying to get rid of all of artificial sweeteners. I'm trying to get rid of anything that's not like considered whole food. And I know with what I mentioned, I basically mentioned only whole foods. But with my breakfast, I would have, it's like regular white bread. And this is where I wanted to talk to you about this sort of stuff. So I'd have like regular white bread with coffee with like sucralose and like other artificial sweeteners and stuff. So since then, I've swapped out with the regular white bread with like sprouted Ezekiel bread. Instead of using artificial sweeteners, I'm sweetening my coffee with honey. So I'm introducing more calories in my coffee. The bread itself might be a wash, if anything, more calories with the bread itself also. But I'm having less food, so I'm having more egg whites and a few less eggs. Middle of the day, I'm having fruit, just again because I'm getting hungry because I'm not having that bigger meal in the beginning of the day. So I'm having a little bit of fruit, and then towards the end of the day, instead of having a diet soda, I'm drinking my dinner with water. Now, dinner's typically going to be the same thing. It's going to be steak, rice, but now I'm including vegetables. Vegetables are still kind of exploding in my stomach, but hopefully we can get to the bottom of that eventually. But I think what's happening is because I'm no longer having that diet soda, I'm kinda looking around like, "Man, I kinda want something to satisfy the sweet tooth side." And so
Yeah.
that could eventually lead to, instead of having a protein shake, now having, like, a big thing of, like, yogurt or something just with a little bit more calories.
Yeah.
And I am noticing that, yeah, like, I'm going from walking around 181, 182 to walking around 185 now. And again, this has been the time span of like this entire year where I am less active right now, but I'm noticing like, oh, it's taking me a little bit longer to drop a couple of lbs, you know. So I don't
Mhm.
know, man. I started following Mike Dolce. You know, we've been talking, and so he's been trying to get me to get rid of all the processed stuff, all the artificial sweeteners, uh, have more frequent meals instead of like the gigantic ones that I was having. And it's an adjustment period, and I'm trying to figure it out. But if I were to be honest and say, like, oh, you want to lose weight or you want to be more productive at work, try the 2 meals a day because that's what's been working really well for me.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing all that. And I wanna preface here really quick what you and I were talking about before the show, that it's something I really appreciate about you and the rest of the crew over at the Power Project. Because, people inherently listen to this, and the fact that I love that I have a formal education in nutrition, but sometimes it backfires in the sense that, like, people just want, only, like, science-based, evidence-based recommendations from me and, like, nothing else. And they might be listening to this podcast and thinking like, "Dr. Joey, how can you have this guy on that's talking about, like, no artificial sweeteners and no this and no that?" And for those of you guys listening that might be thinking that, um, first off, Andrew is not saying that these things are bad, right? Like, this is what I was saying earlier, something that I respect a ton about you and Mark and Nsima, is that you guys just simply share what works for you, right? You don't try to rationalize it with science. And that's the one thing that bothers me about people on social media that try to position themselves as experts, is that they have this particular diet or protocol that they follow and that their identity is tied around. And then they almost try to make up science to back it up. When it's like, hey, you can just say, this is what I do and it works for me, right? Like, and and again, and for example, because you were talking about like limiting some foods and feeling better, there is what science shows is beneficial for the general population, and then there are inter-individual differences too, right? You might have sensitivity. You definitely probably have some GI issues, that you have sensitivities to particular plant-based foods. It's very common, right? I think it's about 10 to 20 people have sensitivities to FODMAP containing foods, which are specific carbohydrates in some foods like tomatoes and broccoli and stuff like that. And that's probably something you have, right? You might have a sensitivity to gluten as well, because you don't have to have full on celiac disease. You could experience bloating and discomfort from gluten without celiac disease. So you probably have some of those GI related things, right? And what I appreciate about you, Andrew, is that, again, you're simply talking about your experience. This is what I do. This is what works for me. You by no means are saying this is an optimal diet. You're just saying this is what makes me feel good. Right. And it's funny because I talk about these things on social media, and like, I would say that my diet also isn't optimal from a science based perspective either. Because I do include things like chocolate and some cookies here and there because I like them, right? And I know how to fit those things into my diet balanced and keep my body composition the way that I like to. So, like, what people need to understand is like, we don't need to aim for perfection, right? We just need to aim for small improvements, and some things may benefit you, and some things that benefit you might not benefit somebody else,
Yeah,
right?
1% better, right? And
Yeah,
it's funny because like I'm sitting here telling you that the diet that I'm currently on, I am not having the most success with, but because I want to explore it and I believe in what Mike Dolce is telling me, I'm going to continue to follow it. But
yeah,
again, I'm not 100% sure why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. Like I'm feeling like I do have a little bit more like bloating throughout the day versus when I don't have vegetables and I kind of have just simply like if I look at it, a lot of the additional calories are coming from the fact that I'm no longer having artificial sweeteners because trust me, dude, I love artificial sweeteners. Coke Zero is my favorite thing to drink, and
yeah,
I'm not having any of it right now. And so what that's like leading to is like me wanting to like snack on other little things here and
of
there that
course.
are not calorie free, right?
Yeah,
And so optimal, perfect, whatever you want to call it, like I know I'm definitely not there with my diet, but it would be a shame of me to say, like, I tried this one diet one time and it worked really, really well. Therefore, everything else sucks. It's like,
yeah,
no, let's just keep exploring and figuring out
yeah.
whether or not we can find something that makes us feel a little bit better.
Yes. I wanna talk about the artificial sweetener thing because this is one I get a lot of slack for, and usually what I tend to tell people, it's like, people immediately with every single thing, they wanna say good or bad, right? And reality, everything is it depends on the context. It can be good and it can be bad in different contexts. And I've said this about diet soda, like you just mentioned, that you realize when you don't have Coke Zero, you crave sweet stuff and overall you probably eat some more calories, right? And I have mentioned this a million times of like for somebody who is overweight and struggles with cravings with sweet foods, having some artificially sweetened stuff strategically can be really helpful for weight loss. And we know that excess fat is one of the main things that contributes to poor health outcomes. So if you can lose weight by drinking some diet soda because now you have less candy, cake, sugar, whatever it is, that's going to have a net positive effect. So in that situation, you can say that diet soda is healthy for that person in that situation. And dude, the amount of hate that I get on that thing, it's funny because I think it's like I'm trying to be as balanced as I possibly can, right? And
Yeah.
like you said earlier, if I had to pick between water and diet soda in a vacuum where no other variable matters, yeah, water's definitely better, right? No argument at all. But I'm like you, man. Like I have a sweet tooth. I typically don't have many sweets. I might have like one sweet a day, right? Like I also follow a habit focused approach. And one of my habits is like, I can have sweets, but I have one sweet a day. Like that's pretty much it. And I'm good with that. It's typically in the morning with my coffee, right? But I do have at least one artificially sweetened drink a day. Because if not, I want more sweets, man, especially at night, right? But I know if I have my dinner, and usually I will have my meal with water and then afterwards grab my diet soda, dude, it's just such a nice way to end the meal. And then I'm not craving other things. I
Mhm.
would definitely argue that overall, that behavior has a positive impact on my health.
Yeah,
Right? So, it's
absolutely.
all about figuring out what works for you, man, and I'll say this, just like my 2 cents on what you're doing. Definitely, obviously, figure out what's working for you. If certain veggies are causing discomfort, try to limit those veggies. I don't know if you've ever taken a, like, systematic approach of testing different veggies rather than just, like, saying, "I'm going no veggies," or eating veggies, and when you eat veggies, just eat whatever veggie. Like, really, really test, like, maybe I'm only gonna start with this one veggie, see how it does. Remove that one. Maybe only test this veggie, see how it does. You know, I know a lot of the veggies that, Stan recommends with the vertical diet are low gas producing veggies, right? Things like red peppers, carrots, and those tend to have very minimal, effects on individuals that do have GI symptoms. And then in addition to that, I would say, like, the meal frequency thing, man, is so individual. Like, if you did well on 2 meals, obviously try more frequent meals if you're just trying to try different things. But I'm similar to you, man. I have 3 meals, but I like having big meals, and that's it. It's just what feels comfortable. When I was younger and really believed in, like, the 6 meals a day, you're burning fat all day type of thing. It's just like, 1, you gotta think about food all day long, right? Doesn't
Mhm.
help. And 2, I just, like, never felt full. And, like, for me, I like the feeling of having a big meal and feeling full for a couple hours. So, those are my 2 cents there.
Yeah, so with the artificial sweeteners thing, um, again, going back to when I was doing everything high carb, low fat, I would just feel like the crazy, like, sharp pain. I would make, that, like, anabolic French toast, right? I'm not sure if you're familiar, but basically it's French
Yeah.
toast with egg whites, a ton of artificial sweeteners and, like, 0 sugar, maple syrup, and it was delicious. It was great. But I found myself hungry right afterwards. But anyway, I would oh, dude, like, my stomach is, like, really, really, like, "Oh, this is painful."
Yeah.
Is there something that, like, you can point to in somebody that's, like, is experiencing some discomfort in their stomach when it comes to artificial sweetener specifically? Now, this could have been an egg white thing. It could have been, a high protein, high carb, low fat thing for my stomach, like, just being a big explosion of protein. But in regards to artificial sweeteners, is there a bit of I'm going to say diagnosis, but I think that's a little bit too dramatic. But is there a diagnosis that where somebody can have that shows, yes, if this person has too many artificial sweeteners, it's going to cause some GI issues?
I really don't know. I know that personally, with sugar alcohols, it tears me up. So,
Yeah.
like, I can't eat Halo Top, dude. I can't.
Oh, yeah.
Like, if I have half a tub of it, Halo Top, I'm super bloated and super gassy. Like, I don't do well with sugar alcohols specifically. Were you putting any of those in the toast?
No, it was just sucralose. So,
Yeah.
what's like one of the sugar alcohols? They end it.
Erythritol?
Anything that
Yeah.
ends in
Oh, oh,
"tol" will destroy
yeah.
me. Like, I don't know
Yeah,
what
that's
it is.
me
Yeah.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah, me
so
too, bro. It's because you don't really digest them. I think
that's right,
people have
yeah.
different tolerances, but overall, like, if you have enough of it, it wrecks you. Like, it's super gas producing. So, like, yeah, I'm pretty sensitive to it. I think everybody's just different when it comes to those things, man. I think I don't know, I think placebo is a really strong factor as well. Like, for example, I just had food poisoning the other day,
Ooh,
a week ago. And I really thought it was this roast beef sandwich that I ate. I bought some roast beef, I bought some cheese, I made a roast beef sandwich, and I really thought it was it. And this is what I'm going somewhere with this, with the placebo thing. After that day, I did not want to touch a roast beef sandwich.
no.
And I told my wife, I'm like, I think it was the roast beef sandwich. And she was like, no, it definitely wasn't because I also ate that roast beef. And like, I'm fine. I'm like, all right. And then like, I was like, well, I'm not going to let the roast beef sandwich go to waste or the roast beef that I bought go to waste. So like 3 days later, when I was feeling fine, I made another roast beef sandwich. And like I had it, and it didn't give me any effect, but I was so like apprehensive to do it. And when I ate it, like the whole time, I was like, "Oh my god, is my stomach feeling bad? Oh my god, I think I'm a little bit bloated. Oh no!" And it's like my mind playing tricks on me, right? I think that's a factor with things too, like diet wise. I think if you believe something strong enough, like maybe you feel it, maybe you don't, maybe it's just your mind, but you could definitely perceive things. I don't know, man. It's tricky.
Yeah. So then, like, when it comes to just like overall diet, like, where are you seeing people have more success as far as like the people you're working with, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, with giving as much as you can away, like, do you have people like start like tracking their food as far as like, hey, let's just keep an agenda open, let's just write down everything you eat, and then we'll go from there? Or do you just say like, hey, here's your macros, like, make it fit?
Yeah. Yeah, I take different approaches with different people. If somebody comes so everybody that I work with is trying to improve overall body composition, right? Loosen body fat, build some muscle. Very rarely do I have somebody who's trying to bulk up. Most people are trying to trim down, right? And every once in a while, one of those clients has GI conditions like yourself. In the circumstance that they do, we take a very detailed food record and then try to systematically remove certain foods and see what's benefiting, right? And most times it's the FODMAP containing foods. And sometimes it's also like the gluten or dairy or some nuts. Those are like the main things that are going to cause discomfort, right? And it's like, hey, let's look at your diet. Do you eat any of these foods? If you do you eat them a lot? And let's try to remove them. And then with some of the veggies, sometimes it's just because they're eating a lot in like raw veggies and they have sensitivities to it. It's like, hey, if we just cook it down a good amount, it helps a ton. As far as approach, when it comes to working with clients, whether I ask them to track calories or focus more on habits, I do both. Oftentimes, if I have a client who's brand new, who like doesn't really even know what protein is, I don't ask them to track calories until like way later on. And essentially what I've done, Andrew, is like, because my approach is that your diet needs to be enjoyable. It needs to meet your nutrient needs and it needs to help with hunger and satiety regulation. I think if your diet can meet those 3 principles, you're gonna have success towards your desired outcome, right? So again, it needs to be enjoyable so it's sustainable. 2, it needs to meet your nutrient needs because you need to consume a certain amount of protein, vitamins, minerals, etc. And it needs to help with hunger and satiety regulation because if you're hungry all the time, good luck. And what I do there is just I've put together a list of different habits that help with those things. Some of the basic ones are like a certain protein goal. I don't really care where your protein's coming from. Just make sure you meet this protein need. A fruit and veggie goal, a fiber target. And then some other things I like to do with nutrition are helping people develop like a regular meal schedule. There's really good research showing to that if you eat at similar times every day, it helps with hunger regulation, right? I try to get clients to eat more earlier in the day versus later in the day because we also see that people that eat more earlier in the day have a little bit higher energy expenditure, so calories burned, right? And that makes sense because if you have a well-balanced breakfast, you probably have a little bit more energy throughout the day, you move a little bit more. So it's just these very, very basic behaviors, man. Trying to limit food consumption at night, those are some of the main ones, really. And then if people have certain like health related issues, like they have high blood lipids or they're pre-diabetic, then that can also like body composition is number one, right? As you lose weight, those things are going to improve. But then sometimes I take it a step further and we look at their specific food choices and swap things out that are shown to improve some of these outcomes, right? So when it comes to like high LDL cholesterol, maybe we try to limit saturated fat, eat a little bit more unsaturated fat. And I say these in these specific contexts because this is one of the things that people argue about, like saturated fat doesn't matter, does not matter. It's like, again, it depends. If you have familial history of high cholesterol and you have high cholesterol, like it's hard to dispute the research showing that if you reduce saturated fat, you reduce LDL cholesterol. And we know that LDL cholesterol is a direct risk factor for cardiovascular disease. And there's people in the carnivore community that are like, I eat a ton of saturated fat and I'm fine. And it's like, yeah, because you probably don't have a genetic issue with your cholesterol, right? Like, so it's so context specific. But yeah, man, to answer your question directly, I mainly take a behavior focused approach to nutrition. And what I do with my clients is what we do an intake form to see where their diet's at baseline. And then from that, I identify the specific habits that would be most beneficial for that person specifically, right? Like if that person's already eating 30 grams of fiber, the first habit we're going to work on is not fiber because they already eat enough fiber, right? So identify the habits that would be most beneficial. And then we just develop one at a time. Like, hey, week one, we're working on this. Good. You're doing well. Week two, we introduce a new one. Week three, we introduce a new one. That's my general approach. And then if they feel comfortable and they want to do so, I definitely recommend tracking calories because we know that energy balance matters. And the third component of what I do is when clients check in with me, I ask them to submit images of their meals for 2 or 3 days of the previous 2 weeks. So then I can just give them like objective feedback on things that they can substitute, right? Because sometimes it's like you can be meeting your habits, right? You can be meeting your protein goal, you can be, with not the best food choices, and the client might be struggling with like, man, like I'm doing these habits, but I'm really hungry at night. It's like, okay, let's look at your diet. Hey, maybe this small little switch would help with that, right? So those are the main three components that I address when it comes to nutrition.
That makes me so happy. I hope, I literally hope, like, everybody starts coming your way because that is such sound advice, and it's tough because, like, I will like, let's say I reiterate, like, something similar to somebody, and it's like, "Well, like, you're not really jacked or you haven't, like, really worked with people," and so, like, my stuff just kinda gets, like, pushed to the side, but I can be like, "Well, okay, here, go follow Joey, like, he's gonna, set you straight," so that's really cool. In regards to the cholesterol thing, because that's actually I forgot to mention this. That's why I started ditching some of the whole eggs, and I want to talk about eggs specifically. So my dad had really high cholesterol. He had triple heart bypass surgery. It just kind of came out of nowhere. He was like, "Oh, my arm kind of goes numb from time to time," and I'm
Mm,
like, Dad, I think you're having a heart attack or something." And sure enough, he
yeah,
had 3 arteries that were maybe it was two, I forget, but he had to get triple heart bypass surgery. So there was a lot of damage in there. When I get
yeah,
my blood work done, I have high cholesterol. Now, the carnivore community will tell me that those markers are, like the range or whatever has been dropped. So that way I can be prescribed statins earlier. And that dietary cholesterol doesn't mean that I'm gonna, raise my actual cholesterol. But again, the thing that I get the most from I guess I'll say like a doctor's perspective is you need to lower your saturated fat. You need to get rid of the cholesterol in your diet, like eggs and that sort of thing. So, how much does that actually play its role on my blood markers with cholesterol when it comes to the dietary cholesterol that I'm
yeah.
consuming?
It's a great question, man. And to to first off, here's what I made a whole episode on the carnivore thing in terms of like what are the positives and what are the negatives. Unfortunately, a lot of these different diet camps make certain claims that can't be disputed, right? In the sense of like, oh, LDL ranges have been dropped so they can sell you more medicine. I guess if you want to believe in the conspiracy, it's really hard to disprove the conspiracy. I will say this. I lived, breathed, and ate research at a university for 6 years. And I personally did not see any examples of fraud or blatant lying for some financial benefit. Okay. You do not go into academics to make money. Professors do not make boatloads of money. There are way easier ways to make money than try to like go into the research field and fuck with research and make stuff up that's not true, right?
Yeah.
If you believe that the science that is produced is accurate, which I do, because I haven't seen any of these examples of the things that people bring up based off my experience, then we can say a couple of things. The number one influencing factor on your blood cholesterol is your genetics, unfortunately, right? The same way, like, we think about cholesterol and stuff like this a little bit differently than some diseases because we also get it from our diet, right? But like our blood cholesterol is mainly influenced by our genetics. We wouldn't say like something like cancer, right? Somebody gets cancer, it's like, man, that's really sad. We know it's mainly genetic. Like, yes, there are some environmental factors, but would you say that like improving some environmental factors would completely eliminate the risk of cancer for somebody? No, right? Unfortunately, there's something in their genetics that's messed up, right? The same can be said with blood lipids. The same can be said with blood sugar. The same can be said with hunger. Right? There are people who are obese who benefit from taking weight loss medications because it helps them regulate their hunger. Because no matter how healthy they eat, they're just freaking starving all day because they have issues with their hunger hormone regulation, like leptin and ghrelin. It's out of whack, right? So when it comes to blood lipids, there's a big genetic component. Dietary cholesterol itself does not seem to impact blood cholesterol that much. Saturated fat does. Saturated fat increases what's called de novo lipogenesis. So your body produces more cholesterol as a byproduct of consuming more saturated fats. And it's a genetic thing as well. And people who have a family history are likely at a higher risk of increasing LDL cholesterol. Now, we also know, and this is the funny part, it's like doctors have lowered the range, almost as like if this is a conspiracy. But if you look at research, we see different ranges being associated with a different risk of developing cardiovascular disease, right? So the ranges don't just get changed because then all that data has to be changed. And unless you believe the data was just completely made up, well, I mean, I guess some people believe that. I don't know. Like the same way some people believe in different religions, right? Like you believe it. There's no evidence to show that that is the case, whatever. Now the point is that yes, if your LDL cholesterol is elevated, you're at a higher risk of cardiovascular disease. Does that mean you're going to have cardiovascular disease? No, because a lot of other things also play a role. It's not just LDL, but the reason why LDL is something people harp on is because LDL is an independent risk factor. What does that mean? When we look at things like risk factors, they're typically influenced by other variables, right? Like um, body fat percentage would influence your blood sugar, right? What it means by independent is that this variable influences cardiovascular risk independent of all other stuff. And the way we know that is because we have data from hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people at this point. And when you have large populations, you can control for the effect of other variables. So you can say, hey, if everybody has the same body fat, does LDL still influence with this? If everybody smokes, is LDL still associated with this? So independent of all these other variables, LDL is associated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Again, it does not mean that you will have cardiovascular disease. It just means it increases your risk. And the things that can be beneficial is a substitution of saturated fat for unsaturated fatty sources and increasing fiber consumption, man. So like when it comes to the fruits and veggies, there's really good research showing too that consuming fruits and veggies alongside saturated fat limits the impact on LDL cholesterol and limits the impact on adverse health outcomes too. So that's the main thing I would say, man. Like, I don't know how elevated your LDL is. And unfortunately, family history is the biggest risk factor,
Yeah,
right?
and that's what got me really curious about it all because I would see it on my labs and be like, "Man, whatever, like, I'm healthy, my body fat percentage is down, I'm active, I overall have a healthy diet." And then when that happened to my dad, and now all of a sudden those red flags were a lot brighter. And so that's
Yeah.
when I started asking these types of questions. And to be totally honest, like I haven't really gotten a clear like yes or no, like if you eat this or that until right now when you're talking about saturated fat. Um, although, like, that's why, like, Mike Dolce has me eating leaner foods, right? And getting rid
Yeah.
of like, the whole eggs for more egg whites,
Yeah.
ditching the rib eyes for, like, these really, really, really lean sirloins from, Piedmontese. It's kind of I think they're lying to us, but th they essentially have, like, no fat, but it's red meat. So, like, swapping those things out to keep the fats lower, but again, like, I knowing that the family history is the main, like, driver of this thing, makes a lot more sense, and it just again, like, when we were talking about, like, exploring things, I could easily listen to the carnivore camps that we've had on the podcast and be like, "Oh, yeah, we're good." The Ansel Keys thing, yep, it's all
Yeah.
skewed, you
And
know?
the thing is, there's such a boatload of research after the whole Ansel Keys things. That's the one thing people bring up. It's like, okay, even if that's complete bullshit, there's just like so much more research since then, right? And here's the thing I'd say, man, like it's not red meat itself, it's a saturated fat content. And you can eat lean sources of red meat. And the whole recommendation is to consume less than 10% of total daily calories from saturated fat, which is actually not that difficult unless you're eating like mainly ribeyes, right? But if you're eating like lean ground beef, if you're eating lean sirloins from Piedmontese, it's fine, right?
Mhm.
The main thing that I think might help you is just increasing your fiber content, man. And now this is interesting thing because if you have sensitivities to some foods, it's really finding the foods that you don't have sensitivities to, right? And unfortunately, foods like beans are some of the highest in fiber, but some people are really sensitive to beans, right? Maybe a fiber supplement might help. But when it comes to supplementation, I'm a bigger fan of eating the food, not from a satiety standpoint, but because there's like thousands of other compounds in the actual food that may have health related benefits that you don't get in the supplemental form.
Ye
Um,
when you sorry to interrupt, you had
okay.
said something along the lines of, like, the vegetables and the fiber, with the saturated fat helps it, like, have less of an impact, overall. Do you mean, like, literally, like, on the same plate? Like, if I have, like, some fibrous vegetables with my, like, ribeye, that it will impact me less for that meal? Or do you mean as a whole? Like, if I have some saturated fat in the morning and then at dinner time I have more vegetables with some lean meat, or is it like literally like I don't want to say cancels it out because then that'd be making too much of a big statement where everybody would be coming after you, but does it work like that where it's like if you
Yeah.
consume them at the same time, then it helps lower the impact?
Um, I don't think it's necessarily at the same time because the research that we have on this just shows like dietary patterns. People that eat more meat but also eat more fruits and veggies have better health outcomes. So I'm not sure if it's even that granular that we know of.
Mhm.
I'll say this: nutrients can inhibit the absorption of other nutrients, right? So I'm not sure, I'm honestly not sure if the consumption of fruits and veggies alongside meat, like, together would inhibit the absorption of saturated fat. So I don't really know. But if there was a benefit of consuming it together, it would be because of that. Now, what we do know, the benefit of consuming more fiber from fruits and veggies is because when you digest and absorb fat, you use something called bile. Have you heard of bile?
Of course.
Bile, right?
Mhm.
Yep. So it's produced in your gallbladder. It's rich in cholesterol, okay? And you use it to emulsify fat, and it's part of the metabolic process of digesting fat. Now, you recycle bile. So you can use it and then your body can recycle it. When you consume more fiber, you recycle less and you excrete more of it through your feces. So you're pooping out more cholesterol. So that's one of the main mechanisms as to how fiber consumption helps reduce cholesterol. That's really the main thing. You know, when you said cancels out, you reminded me of something really, really funny. I saw this short clip on Instagram. Have you ever seen that show? It's like My 600 Pound Life.
I mean, yeah, a handful of times. Yeah, yeah,
They're like 2 ladies on that show who were very overweight, and they were talking to a dietitian or whatever. You know what show I'm talking about?
yeah.
The Sody Pops. They
Yeah.
ask her how many Sody Pops she has, and so she has, like, regular soda and diet soda, and she says that her mom said that the diet Sody Pops cancel out the regular Sody Pops.
Yes, yes. Oh my
It's too
gosh.
good.
That's so funny because how many people were probably like, "Whoa, it does?"
Yeah,
It's so much, it's so
yeah,
funny. We talk about this a lot. It's like there should be one book on diet and nutrition, and then that's it. Like, like that one book tells us everything, and we don't need
yeah,
nutritionists, we don't need dietitians, we don't need this podcast, we don't need any of this. But unfortunately, the
yeah,
diet sody pops don't cancel out the regular sody pops, and people don't understand that, and it's just so much confusion in the diet and nutrition space, and it's just, quite an undertaking that you have, like, taken on to, like, help educate people on this subject because I know it's deep, man. We
Yeah, man.
answer, like, the same questions over and over, and they just keep coming back, and so it's like,
Yeah.
man, like, it's tough.
There's always new people listening, and there's always you even though you answer the same questions, you say slightly different things, you phrase it slightly different, and so it hits different with the same person sometimes too. The one thing that bothers me about the LDL thing, man, like with the carnivore community saying it doesn't matter, is that like we actually know very, very well why LDL increases cardiovascular risk. So HDL and LDL, that's what we call good and bad cholesterol, right? I hate those terms because HDL is not actually cholesterol and LDL is not actually cholesterol. There are these different molecules essentially that travel through our bloodstream that have slightly different roles. Okay, so HDL actually travels through your bloodstream and picks up cholesterol, okay, and transports it back to the liver. LDL cholesterol travels through your bloodstream and deposits cholesterol, okay? And so if you have an artery and think of it like you're looking through the artery, it's circular. And if you have a deposit of cholesterol, it starts to build up plaque,
Mhm.
right? LDL, the particles themselves can be oxidized as well, which means something completely different. And it's part of the reason why you develop what's called atherosclerosis, which is just plaque buildup in an artery. But just understand that the more LDL you have traveling through your blood, the higher the likelihood of developing plaque because you're depositing cholesterol and it's building up and it's building up and it can build a blockage in the artery, right? Like we understand this very well. For example, if somebody said something about cancer, I don't I don't know much about cancer, but my understanding is that we don't understand it nearly as well as something like cardiovascular disease, which we actually understand very, very well, right? So those are the things that bother me, man. It's like
Mm.
can somebody eat a predominantly meat-based diet and be healthy? Yeah. But then to say that like, "Hey, your cholesterol doesn't matter at all," is just a statement to fit somebody's bias,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and
It's
then
frustrating.
the argument of, like, well, if you look at the studies, those that have heart attacks have the lower cholesterol versus not, and then, I forgot who it was, but they brought it up on the podcast, and I was like, "Oh, well, no
Let me address
doubt."
that point
Go
because
ahead.
that is complete bullshit.
Yeah, no, I
It's a
wanna hear.
it's a it's a U-shaped curve, okay? So so there's everything has a physiological function, right? This is the same about like blood sugar. Like, hey, your blood sugar shouldn't be really, really high because you're diabetic. But if you have no blood sugar, you're dead, right? So, like, everything has a function. There's an optimal range. There's an optimal range for cholesterol as well. People on their deathbeds literally have very low cholesterol because their bodies are not producing cholesterol because their bodies are not functioning correctly, right? So it's not like they this is the thing, like, there's a relationship, and then people wanna say that it's causal, right? "Oh, they died and their cholesterol was really low, so people who have low cholesterol have a higher risk of dying." That's not true, and the funny thing about the carnivore crew, man, in my opinion, is that they really, really trash on some of these correlation-based studies, but then they use the correlation-based studies to prove their bias, right? So it's like, pick your poison, right? And Lane Norton is somebody who's very passionate about this, and he says it with way more passion than I do. I feel like it's funny. One of the comments that I get from people, it's like, "You're way too balanced. You're way too calm." And it's just like it's my nature. And like, right? Like Lane's very animated about this, but it's like, man, like Paul Saladino. Again, nothing against him. I don't know the guy at all, but like the one thing he says, like all of this fiber related research, all of this data is correlational in nature. Like it doesn't mean anything. First off, when it comes to correlational data, it's like there are different types of studies. There are cell culture studies, there are clinical studies, there are correlational studies, right? One of them alone doesn't paint the entire picture. Like somebody who like knows how to read and look at research doesn't just look at one study and say this is it. You look at the totality of stuff, right? So I talked about mechanisms with LDL and atherosclerosis. I talked about clinical outcomes with saturated fat and LDL, and I talked about correlational studies between LDL and cardiovascular outcomes. Why are those all different? First and foremost, in a clinical controlled study, which is what some carnivores say is the only thing you can use for evidence, it would be it wouldn't be ethical to purposefully raise somebody's LDL and give them cardiovascular disease. That's why you can't do that. Also, cardiovascular disease takes years to develop, so you can't really do a clinical study like that because it's really, really expensive. So what we rely on is our correlational data. But if you have correlations with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of individuals, and it's consistently showing the same outcome, it's pretty good data. Now, the clinical data that we show is that we do see if you give somebody more saturated fat, their LDL goes up. So we can't be 100% certain, but we're pretty damn certain. If you eat more saturated fat, LDL goes up. And we see this in hundreds of thousands of people that if you have high LDL, you have more incidence of cardiovascular disease. And when we look at the Petri dish studies, we see that LDL increases plaque buildup. Like that's the specific mechanism. Well, that's like A, B, C. This is what's going on. The likelihood that that's not true is very, very, very slim. There's always a likelihood because that's the way science works, because it's based off probability, and the probability is never 100%, nor is it zero. But then, the carnivores are just like, yeah, the correlational stuff doesn't mean anything. But then they use correlational stuff to say that some ridiculous claims about carnivore diets. And it's like, I don't know, man. The funny thing that I see with a lot of the carnivore crew is that like a lot of them used to be vegans before, right? And like Paul Saladino used to be a vegan. And then he was like, no, vegan doesn't work at all. Like only eat meat now. And then he realized like only eating meat wasn't the most sustainable for him. So now he's like, all right, now you can include some fruit. And it just feels like this guy's just like, yeah, like now I want to change it. So now I change it. And now this is optimal. And this is why it's optimal. And this is why it's okay to eat fruit and not to eat veggies. But just a couple years ago, I was saying not to eat fruit. And I don't see how people don't see through.
Yeah,
It blows my
and
mind.
no, I know, and, so real quick on that note, when we had Mike Dolce on the show, he went hard, and he was like, "Look, he was a vegan and failed. He was a keto guy and
I
failed.
saw that clip.
Then he
Yeah.
was a carnivore and failed." He's like, Why am I gonna continue to follow this guy's information if he keeps failing and he keeps jumping onto the next trend? Because, oh, by the way, here, buy this carnivore book," and then, "Oh, I'm not doing that anymore, do this thing." And so it is tough, right? Because, like, they I'll say they because they can be literally anybody in any camp where they will nitpick these certain studies and then throw out these other ones because who it was funded by or whatever
Yeah.
the overall agenda was for that study. And that's where, like, I said earlier, I stopped looking at diet and I stopped nitpicking or cherry picking, I should say, the stuff that was super convenient for me, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, like Anthony Chaffee came on, told me not to worry about cholesterol, but then the OG carnivore, Sean Baker, he's like, if you get your labs done and your cholesterol's high, or maybe he said your LDL's high, I'm not going to tell you to continue to eat saturated fat. I'm going to tell you to continue to eat meat, but start going towards the leaner cuts until we figure out what's going on with your thing. And I was like, what a balanced approach
Yeah. Yeah.
for somebody on in the carnivore camp, right? That was really cool. What I wanted to ask you was, of all the circles, who do you feel comes at you the hardest when it comes to some of the information that you're putting out?
I wouldn't say anybody comes at me at the hardest. Like, dude, it's funny. I actually don't get a lot of hate from like other creators.
Okay.
Even though I respond to a lot of content from other creators, it's mainly just like people who don't do social media in the comments more than anything.
Mhm.
And it's really just any okay. What I get the most slack for by far is anytime I mention that any sort of processed food is okay to include in your diet.
Mhm.
Right? So, like, I made the video about, like, Coke Zero, so much hate. I made a video recently, and it's just that people either, like, are brain dead or they choose to act like they're brain dead.
Yeah.
Because I really try to like, every video that I make, I script, so I make sure that I read through it and say the things that I wanna say, and so, to give you this is a perfect example, and this is the same logic that I get hate for on all my videos. Do you know Eddie Abu?
No.
No? He's the, like, ex-bodybuilder guy. He's probably in, like, his 50s or 60s. He's from England, and he's just like, anything that is processed he's just like, "This is shit. Only eat this." And his whole thing is, like, the insulin thing, like, "Don't even eat fruit because insulin." Anyways, I made a video responding to one of his videos where he was talking about he's like, "These are 2 eggs. There's 12 grams of protein. This is a protein bar. It has 20 grams of protein." And he was like, "But there's too many ingredients in this, so the protein's not bioavailable, so it's shit." And my whole point with that video was to say that the number of ingredients does not influence how bioavailable the protein is. And in fact, whey protein, which he always says is shit, is the most bioavailable type of protein. Like you just absorb it all because it's pretty much pre-digested, right? That has nothing to do with the number of ingredients. And dude, just like the hundreds of comments of hate is crazy. And people are just like, no, thank you. I'll always eat eggs before a protein bar. And the funny thing is, like, yeah, I would always eat eggs before a protein bar too, right? I'm never going to choose the protein bar over the eggs. It's like, how can you say that sugary thing is okay, or how can you say that processed? That's what I get the most hate for overall. I think when I talk about specific diet camps like carnivore or vegan or whatnot, I think I do a really good job of being nuanced with it and having a balanced perspective with it. So I actually don't get a ton of hate on those videos. Sometimes a carnivore will be like, don't eat plants, but it's just like one random off comment. It's mainly around the processed food stuff. And when I try to tell people that context matters and that there's no such thing as just straight up good and bad in every situation, that's what I get the most hate for sure.
Got it. So like now that like my personal Instagram has like taken a pretty hard left, it was kind of just like all over the place. It was about like my diet, it was about like jujitsu, everything, and it's totally switched over to like trying to educate and not really say anything too drastic or dramatic, and again just trying to educate people on like podcasting and stuff. It's like really tanked. And I'm not sure if it's because I'm also including like, hey, if you want more information, you can go buy this course or whatever it is. And people are like that, I don't want anything to deal with you. But for yourself, like I said, you're not, I mean, yes, your Instagram and everything you put out is super entertaining. It is attention grabbing, but you're also not saying like, here's this magic pill and like here's all the answers. You're just giving out factual information. What do you think it is that you've been able, like how you're able to garner so much attention with like I don't want to say basic, but you know what I mean, like nothing that's like too like outlandish with the information that you're putting out there, because like I'm finding when I put out just educational stuff, it doesn't get the clicks, it doesn't get the likes, it doesn't get the views. And, like, I've literally been able to put out, like, almost anything, and it gets, like, thousands of views, right? And I'm super grateful for it. The second I put some effort into trying to educate, it's, like, a couple hundred. I'm like, "Whoa, like, this is really hard." So, I'm curious, like, what have you been able to, like, figure out as far as, like, getting the traction with straight up educational content
Yeah.
on a platform that is mainly, gets attraction from, like, entertainment, funny, outlandish stuff.
Yeah. So first and foremost, your educational content is mainly around podcasting specifically, right?
Mhm.
I think just like thinking about the pool of people that are interested in one thing versus another is definitely a big variable, right? Like, dude, everybody cares about nutrition.
Yeah.
Everybody cares about exercise. Everybody wants to look better. So I
Mhm.
think in general, like specific topics get more attention because just more people care about it, right? So I wouldn't necessarily feel bogged down because of that. Cause it's like, how many people are really looking to start a podcast and blow it up? A lot of people are, but not nearly as many as the amount of people that are trying to lose weight,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So that's one for sure. And I see a lot of people from a monetization standpoint. I see a lot of people with really small followings in other niches that make a killing with what they sell, right? Because if your intent and dude, I'm not a whiz on the business side of things at all, but I'm trying to read more and learn more about the business side of things. Um, if like I would assume that the type of audience that is seeking out content on how to podcast correctly is more likely to actually purchase a product that teaches them how to podcast versus somebody who's just following an influencer who talks about diet and stuff because they're just getting information and like they just like it. So that's number one for sure. If you're talking about it from a monetization standpoint, I don't think the size of the audience matters that much compared to the niche and then like how you're actually doing some marketing stuff, right? Because like for me, and this is something I've been learning, I try to sell as little as possible on social media and give value. And what I do selling with is email lists, right? And people listening at this point probably do not care what we're talking about. But
Never.
so I use it strategically as giving a free lead magnet, right? So hey, you watch this video, you want to learn more, download my free book. You download my free book. Now you're in my email list. Now I market to you my products via email because I have realized when you sell directly on Instagram, it tanks engagement, right? Whereas I can make the same video and at the end say, if you want to work with me for coaching, hire me. That's not going to do well. I can do the same exact video and say, comment blueprint, get my free ebook. That's going to do a lot better because people comment and the engagement is there,
Mhm.
right? Aside from that, in terms of viral content, one thing that I do think that I'm good at is being very analytical about what's working in my circle, right? So like maybe do some research on other podcast content creators and see who's doing well and mimic their style. In my niche, I realized that like the people that were doing the reaction content did really well. That I used to do no reaction content. The day I switched over to reaction content, my videos got more than twice the views. Nothing else changed. And the other thing that helps is making a controversial statement in your first sentence. That's it. So
Mhm.
like the videos that are not reaction based for me, just don't do well compared to the reaction ones. It's just the truth, man.
Yeah.
Because people like it creates context. It creates like a little mystery, so people watch the videos that I don't do reactions to. I try to be really controversial at the beginning. For example, like the diet soda video. The first thing I said is diet soda is healthy. Here's why.
Ooh.
Immediately, people are going to listen, right? For example, like give me an example of one of the biggest mistakes people make with like some sort of setup or something like that.
Yeah, well, so I've been toying with this idea because I keep seeing it and it drives me absolutely nuts. And it's funny because literally everybody around me, all my friends, like really close people to me, Mark and Seema, my buddy Josh, like they all do this. And I kind of am going to shit on everybody. But it's this thing that I don't know if it's like Gen Zers started, but they will hold a clip on mic and it drives me crazy because it's supposed to be a clip-on thing, but
There you
they
go.
hold it right here like if it's a handheld microphone, and I kinda wanted to start it off by saying, like, this is literally gonna piss off everybody, and then, like, show examples of everybody doing it, and then also kinda do it myself as well. But just again, just something that, like, because, like, the equivalent of the opposite would be me taping this handheld microphone or
Yeah,
this,
yeah.
taping it up here and being silly with it. But that was just the first thing that came to my mind. Outside of that, it's just simply having the wrong microphone, which I've done a couple times already, but I didn't do it in quite a way that you're explaining.
Do you script your stuff?
Yeah, I do a little bit. What I find is I will overscript and then completely not look at it. So I have
Yeah.
to do like bullet points, but I will have, like hook, like the main portion and then like the payoff at the end.
For
And I
like a short video, I mean, like for an Instagram reel, the
yeah,
scripting, yeah.
yeah.
So check this out. 2 things. First off, for example, like with your audio stuff, you make a video and you try this out. This is why your audio sounds like shit, right? And then you go into some backstory.
Yeah.
The thing is, people when you do a reel, when you do a video, you're technically telling a story, right? And people always tend to start at the beginning of the story. But that's not logically, that's where you start, but that's not the most attention grabbing portion of the story. So what I tend to do, Andrew, is like I write my script first, and then I look at my script and I'm like, which sentence is the best sentence? And I just say that at the beginning. And
Mhm.
it's typically like the peak of your uh of your story, right? So for example, like this is something I've been learning with some email marketing stuff, and it's like, I'm like, damn, why do people not read my emails? They're just like not enticing, right? And so I'm reading some books from Russell Brunson, and he's talking about email marketing. He's like, start your emails, start your story in the juiciest part of the story, and then get back context. I'm actually about to try this with a video after we get off here on Instagram, where I tell my personal story about like how I went from being overweight to falling into diet culture stuff, having food anxiety, and then like being to where I'm at today. Usually I would start that story at the beginning, right? Instead of that, it's like, what's the biggest problem? I'm starting by saying, I used to be overweight, scared of food, and didn't like my body. This all started when I was blank, 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 and then go with the story. But
Mm,
that's more attractive first line. I think for what you do, the first line is the most important thing. I'm not sure if you follow this guy. He has a course not just on podcasting, but on how to build a home studio specifically. His name's On Screen Authority.
mm,
Dude, small following. I know him personally. I know he makes a killing. And his videos are really good, man. And it's just like very simple things like tips too, but like the hook is really good. It's like you're making this one lighting mistake and he's making it in the video so it looks really funny, right? And then he'll like snap and now the lighting's good. And
Mhm.
then he tells you how to make that transition, right? And that's like just like it hooks you in for sure.
Yeah, that's dope. That's incredible, and what's funny is, like, again, like, if you go through my course, the way that you're explaining how to start a reel or a TikTok video or whatever is exactly how I tell you how to start a
Yeah.
podcast episode, so yeah, it's just, like, having these open conversations and, like,
Yeah.
because I do it all the time to people where they'll ask me something and I'll give them the obvious answer like you're doing right now to me, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, of course, I knew that," and, like, they just need somebody else to cement that idea just like what you did for me right now, so this has actually been cool, and I mean, hopefully, there's a couple people that are interested in this part of the
Yeah.
conversation, but I just figured I would take advantage of our time together because I'm sure getting a one-on-one call with you is a lot more expensive than hanging out on a podcast. So I'm like, hey, I'm gonna take advantage while I
That's
can.
why it's so funny. I made a podcast with that in mind. I was like, "Oh, I can meet people that I wanna meet, and, like, I don't need to hire them." I was like, "Yo, I could have Mike Erzaton on the podcast, Dan Efferding, this guy, that guy, who are huge in the industry. I could just connect with them just because I have a podcast." That was I before I did the podcast, I was trying to do more, like, 10-minute YouTube style stuff, like, highly produced, and I was like, "This takes a ton of effort, and, like, it doesn't get me anywhere besides, like, growing on YouTube, which is great." But I'm like, "It'd probably be much better to have a podcast and, like, actually meet people and network that way." So selfishly, that's why I started a podcast.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah,
with
man, I love chatting about these things. With the social media stuff, I'm happy to help anytime. It's funny because I have a good friend of mine that helps me with business stuff because he's a lot further along than I am, and he does, uh, very similar type of business in a completely different niche.
mm,
So it's not fitness at all, but he has a coaching business. And he's been mentoring me on like how to make a webinar that actually converts into sales. And he's having a similar struggle with his social media where like his videos don't hit as well as mine do. I think partially it's also the niche. It's like a very specific topic. It's people who struggle with a very specific, like emotional regulation based thing, right? At least from my understanding, that's what it is. I could just have totally butchered that. But anyways, it's like the audience is smaller, right?
yeah.
But then two, he was telling me how to structure a webinar so it hits. And he's like, and then he's asking about reels, and I'm like, dude, everything you just told me about a webinar, like, do that with your reel. It's the same exact
Yeah.
thing. And it's funny because I do it naturally with my reels. And when he told me about the webinar, I'm like, oh, I do that with my videos. Like, I need to do this here. It's yeah. Hearing it from somebody else definitely helps.
Yeah, that's funny. And then, like, in regards to, like, starting the podcast and stuff, you can still do all the other stuff because it's kind of, like, already done for you, right? You have this hour or no, over 2-hour conversation, and then now you chop that up into your 10-minute videos or your, 59-second IG clips or
Yeah.
whatever, or now 90 seconds because they're starting to promote longer videos, thank goodness. Uh, all that good stuff. Oops, let me say, click. This little pop up came up, but yeah. So like a podcast is just like an insane content creating machine. Like we literally run an entire company just because of a podcast. We have employees because of a simple little silly
Yeah.
podcast. And it's just like it's just a lot of fun, man. I love being in this space. I love the opportunity to be able to talk to you today and, again, like I said this on a podcast recently, um, because of podcasts, I have like so much more knowledge and education on diet, nutrition, fitness, everything to
Yeah.
where like I can have a conversation with a doctor and like question them. And I'm not saying that I'm as smart as a doctor
Yeah.
or
You
any of,
understand things.
but when it came to my mom having cancer and stuff, I would ask some very elementary level questions and they were like a little confused. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, you don't understand about like the whole sugar and, like cancer cells and all this stuff. Like, it was really odd. And they were like, no, no, no. Like, she needs to be consuming Ensure and she can have ice cream whenever she wants and this sort of thing. And I'm like, whoa, like that sounds way against everything I've ever heard. But I guess you're the doctor, but it just empowered me and it gave me the ability to kind of just question things because of what I've learned through podcasting. And I think it's just super important that you yourself continues to put out this information for people like myself, for anybody that's listening to just be able to expand their horizons and understand that like, hey, like sometimes like the traditional method of learning isn't for everybody, but if you can pick stuff up on a podcast, man, you can really hold yourself high in some of these like really respected circles as far as like these medical and diet nutrition conversations because it's not going to be stuff you've never heard of, right? And so I think it's
Yeah.
just really cool. I love this space.
Yeah, I'm happy you brought up, like, different people learn differently. Because similarly, man, like, I started a podcast because I consume podcasts.
Hmm.
If I am gonna learn something, I'll listen to an audiobook, not read a book, right? So for me, it's like it was a similar thing where I'm like, well, I have the opportunity of reaching a whole other segment of people that, like, don't like short form content, don't like reading books, didn't go to school for this stuff, but they like listening to people talk about it. And honestly, I've learned so much too just from listening to podcasts, like with business stuff. Just look up a business podcast from somebody I respect and like listen to their stuff. And
Yeah.
like, truth be told, and this is why we have other products like you have your course, because you can't learn everything from just a podcast unless you spend a couple years listening to the podcast. Because the difference is that the information is not organized in a logical fashion, right?
Yeah.
That's really all it is. But it is I think the accessibility to information is great. I think there are some downsides because it's hard to know what's good and what's not, right? And not just in the nutrition space. I think you could fall into this in any space. And that's one of the, I guess, everything's a double-edged sword, right? There's some pros and cons, just like with any food.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, man, I appreciate you a ton today, Andrew. It's been a great conversation. I would love if you take a second to share where people can learn more from you. And by the way, guys, if you haven't heard of Andrew before, and maybe you're questioning credibility when it comes to podcasting knowledge, first off, look at how beautiful his studio looks compared to mine.
Thank you.
Check him out. Check out the Power Project. It's freaking a fantastic podcast. If you've never listened to it, check it out. And I know you have a ton of reviews and stuff on your website too of other big names that you've worked with. So, do you mind also sharing where people can get your course and learn more from you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much again for everything today. I'm just super grateful and like I'll never ever take this opportunity lightly. So anything I can ever help, like I know we've been chatting it up in the past, but like moving forward, man, you have my number, you got my email. You have any way you need to connect with me, please do reach out because like just thank you so much. But yeah, no, so like I've wanted to put out whether it be like an ebook or a course or something for a very long time, but just like a lot of people, I had like the what's it called? Imposter syndrome, or I just was like really insecure with my abilities as a podcast producer, as a podcaster, in whole. But every time we'd have a big name on the show, they would ask me a bunch of questions and I would always be answering them. The last straw was we had the former head of media at CrossFit. He was asking me a bunch of questions and he's like thousands of episodes deep on his podcast and he was like, "Oh, how do you do this? How do you do that?" And I'm just firing off answer after answer and he's just like, "Dude, I need your number because I need to learn from you." And I'm like, "Dude, when I first got in the game, like, I was looking up to you. Like, what are you talking about? You need to learn from me." And so that was the last straw. And so after that, I just every day I've been in this room recording a ton of content, trying to leave no stone unturned. Really just trying to help people get their message out there via a podcast. I will say that, like, if you're a brand, if you're a coach, if you have a product to sell, if you have anything that requires attention, it's kind of irresponsible of you to not have a podcast. But even if you don't have that, your story, uh, just like mine has, could potentially save someone's life. Somebody has multiple times at this point have DM'd me and said, like, "Dude, I resonate with your story so well. I grew up the same way. I didn't know much about diet nutrition, followed the path of my family because I come from a family of uh, alcoholics in denial. So that's what I did too. And it's just like others, they're like, I went down that same path and I thought I was going nowhere in life. And you essentially saved my life through the podcast. That stuff's super important. So you don't know who you could impact with your podcast. Doesn't matter if you get 10 views, 10,000 views or downloads, I should say. All you need to do is impact one person and it's worth it. And so I wanted to make it as easy as possible for anybody to launch a podcast within 30 days, or if you have a podcast, level that podcast up so that way your message and your message can reach way more people. And I wish I could say that it all started right out the gate. Like I was just an expert and I figured everything out right away, but that's not the case. It took many, many many mistakes, many lessons learned. But over the years, over at this point, 1,059 episodes, well over 80 million views and downloads. I have figured out a lot of stuff along the way. And so I have put all of those in this really awesome curated podcasting course at pursuepodcasting.com. Again, that's just a culmination of everything I've learned in a step by step guide. Joey's had a glimpse at it, so hopefully he can give me a quick little review. But again, yeah, that's at pursuepodcasting.com. And then if you're not sure, exactly where to start as far as like equipment and that sort of thing, you can head to pursuepodcasting.com/Joey, and you will receive a free podcast equipment purchasing guide as well as a video lesson breaking down my go-to setup for a home studio like this, or a bigger studio setup where like you can really it'll take you anywhere, unless you needed more than 3 cameras and more than like 6 microphones. Other than that, you'd be set for a very, very long time. But yeah, man, that's where everything is. And my Instagram is at I am Andrew Z. And again, man, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yeah, no, of course, dude. And thank you for sharing that. And for people listening that might be interested, I want to add something there about your course.
Mhm.
One thing that I thought was really cool is that it really is for beginners or more advanced people, right? So like you teach people everything, not just how to set up your podcast, but how to publish a podcast. What should your podcast look like? How do you get ideas for podcasts? And then more advanced things like how do you blow it up on YouTube? How do you create content elsewhere? So like it really does have strategies for everybody. Andrew, I appreciate you a ton. For those of you guys listening this far, thank you so much for listening to the entire episode. As always, the links to Andrew's stuff will be down in the description. And if you enjoyed this episode, all I ask is for you to take a second to review the podcast and give it a thumbs up because it helps me a ton. Thank you guys, and I'll catch you in next week's episode. See ya.